Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift back in time, wrapping ourselves in the thick, humid air of old Edo, the sprawling metropolis that would one day become Tokyo. Imagine yourself there, not in a sterile history book, but standing on a rickety wooden bridge over a sluggish canal, the moon a sliver above paper lanterns casting flickering shadows. The city is settling, but it's never truly silent. You can hear the distant clatter of geta on stone paths, the faint murmur of voices from enclosed courtyards, maybe the melancholic call of a street vendor selling late-night noodles. The air smells of charcoal smoke, damp earth, and something indefinably Edo. It's a place teeming with millions stacked one on top of the other in low, close-packed wooden buildings. A place where life was vibrant, chaotic, and utterly unique. But as you stand there listening to the city breathe, sometimes, just sometimes, you might catch another sound. Something far stranger. Something coming not from the surface, but from deep, deep below your feet. This is the sound we're chasing tonight. The mysterious drumming beneath Edo's streets. It's a puzzle whispered about in the shadows, a historical oddity that's frankly quite unsettling. And honestly, given the seismic activity Japan experiences, the idea of unexplained noises from underground, yeah, you probably won't survive this part wide awake. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Love seeing how far these sleepy tales travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So you're standing on that bridge, or maybe you've wandered down a narrow alleyway, the kind where laundry hangs overhead, and the only light spills from cracks in sliding doors. The city feels dense, solid in its own way, despite being built mostly from wood and paper. Edo was huge, one of the largest cities in the world by the 18th century, easily surpassing Paris or London in population. Millions of souls crammed into this low-rise labyrinth under the watchful, though often distant eye of the shogun in his mighty castle. Think about that scale for a moment. Millions living, working, eating, sleeping, and dying in this specific few square miles. Every step you take is on ground that countless others have trod for centuries. Every breath you take is air that's drifted through countless homes and workshops. It's a place saturated with human presence, a place that feels incredibly alive, but also incredibly vulnerable. Edo's primary building material was wood. Beautiful, versatile wood, yes, but also spectacularly flammable wood. Fires weren't just a risk, they were an almost guaranteed regular devastating event. The city burned and rebuilt itself again and again, a cycle of destruction and renewal woven into its very fabric. You can almost feel the ghosts of past conflagrations in the air, a phantom warmth rising from the packed earth. It's a city built on layers both physical and historical, with the ghosts of past lives and past disasters always lingering just out of sight. The layout itself is fascinating and honestly probably designed to make you get lost unless you really knew your way around. Winding streets, sudden dead ends, canals appearing seemingly out of nowhere. It wasn't a grid like some modern cities. It grew organically, sprawling outwards from the central heart of the shogun's castle. Different districts had different vibes. The samurai residences vast and imposing, the merchant quarters bustling and noisy, the pleasure districts glittering with artificial light and the promise of fleeting joy. The humble homes of artisans and laborers packed tight together, and beneath it all, the earth itself. Not just inert dirt, but the living, breathing, sometimes grumbling geological reality of Japan. You feel the subtle vibration of the city constantly through the soles of your straw sandals or bare feet. The rumble of a heavy cart, the thud of hammers, the distant clatter from a busy market. These are the expected sounds of Edo. But the sound we're talking about is different. It wasn't the sound of the city on the ground. It was the sound of something under the ground. A low resonant thrumming, sometimes described as a drumming, a pulsing, or even a deep knocking. It wasn't constant. It would come and go seemingly without warning, lasting for varying lengths of time. And crucially, nobody could figure out where it was coming from or what was causing it. Imagine you're one of the millions living here. Your life is governed by routine, by the seasons, by the dictates of the shogunate, by the need to earn a living. The world you know is the surface world, the world of shops and homes and temples and canals. The underground is, well, it's just dirt, right? Maybe foundations, old wells, refused pits. But definitely not a place where rhythmic sounds should originate. So when this drumming starts, you notice it. Maybe at first you dismiss it, just construction somewhere. But it's too regular too, deep. It doesn't sound like hammers or digging. It sounds like something else. Something big maybe, something deliberate. This sound became a quiet, persistent enigma for many who lived in Edo during certain periods. It wasn't something that paralyzed the city, not like a massive fire or an earthquake. People still went about their lives. But it was a persistent, unsettling background noise that chipped away at the predictability of their world. A reminder that beneath the carefully constructed surface of their bustling city lay something unknown, something potentially vast and mysterious, tapping away in the dark. The reports of this drumming seem to cluster around certain times, although pinpointing exactly when and where is tricky, as we'll see. It wasn't a phenomenon that was meticulously documented by the shogunate, at least not initially. It was more of a word-of-mouth thing, a strange tale shared in tea houses, whispered in neighborhood gossip, perhaps even mentioned briefly in personal diaries. Think of it like that weird, persistent low hum some people report hearing in certain towns today, the so-called Taos hum or Bristol hum. It's not something everyone hears, and those who do are often dismissed, but for them, it's a very real, very unsettling presence in their lives. This Edo drumming had a similar quality, but with the added layer of historical distance and the rich tapestry of Japanese folklore and belief systems. How did you, an average Edo resident, process this? Was it scary, annoying, just weird? Your initial reaction might depend on your background, your beliefs, and perhaps how often and how loudly you heard it. If you lived near the castle, did it feel like a threat? If you lived near a river, did you blame the water? If you were a particularly superstitious sort, did you immediately think of yokai spirits or creatures from beneath the earth? These are the kind of questions that would have swirled around in people's minds. Questions we'll explore as we delve deeper into this mystery. For tonight, our goal is simple. We're going to walk through this historical puzzle together, step by sleepy step. We'll explore the city, listen to the sounds, consider the possible explanations, from the mundane to the truly bizarre, and see if we can shed any light on this strange subterranean rhythm. We're going to look at the physical reality of Edo, its geology and waterways. We're going to examine the historical accounts, however sparse. And we're going to dip into the world of folklore and the supernatural that was so intertwined with daily life in Edo. It's a journey into the unknown beneath the streets of one of history's most fascinating cities. This is your introduction to the mystery. You are here in Edo at night, hearing something inexplicable coming from below. A steady rhythmic beat that seems impossible yet undeniable. It's a sound that challenges your understanding of the world, a sound that forces you to confront the fact that even in a city as well known and documented as Edo, there are still secrets buried deep waiting to be rediscovered. And tonight, we are the ones doing the digging, albeit metaphorically and hopefully sleepily. The stage is set. The city is quietening down, save for that strange, deep thrumming. You feel a sense of unease, perhaps mixed with curiosity. What could it be, a natural phenomenon, something man-made, long forgotten, or something else? The questions linger in the humid night air, as persistent as the drumming itself. And with that thought, you take a deep breath, ready to step further into the shadows of Edo's past, following the beat of a drum that maybe, just maybe, is still echoing somewhere in the deep layers of history. You've heard it now, that low, persistent sound coming from deep beneath the city's skin. It's not the rumble of a passing cart, nor the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It's something else entirely, a rhythmic pulse that seems to originate not on the ground, but within it. And you are definitely not the only one who hears it. As you spend more time in Edo, perhaps talking to neighbor shopkeepers or even the occasional weary samurai who's had too much sake, you start to realize this isn't some localized anomaly or trick of your own ears. Others have heard it too. They whisper about it, usually in hushed tones, sometimes with a nervous laugh, sometimes with a look of genuine unease in their eyes. The descriptions vary, but there's a common thread, like a drum, some say. Not a sharp military drum, but a low resonant beat like a taiko. drum played far away or maybe submerged in water. Others describe it as a persistent knocking, a steady rap, tap, tap against the underside of the world. A thrumming, a pulsing, a vibration that you feel as much as hear. It's the inconsistency that's particularly unsettling. It doesn't happen every night. It doesn't happen at a predictable time. It just starts. Sometimes it lasts for only a few minutes, a quick ghostly performance from the deep. Other times it can go on for hours, a relentless rhythm that drills into your consciousness and makes sleep impossible. Imagine trying to drift off with the feeling that something enormous is tapping away directly beneath your bed. Not exactly conducive to sweet dreams, is it? The people who first reported it, or at least the people whose reports eventually filtered up into anecdotal history, were mostly ordinary folk. Merchants in their shops, laborers returning home, late people waking in the dead of night. It wasn't the stuff of official reports or scholarly treatises at this stage. It was the murmurings of the populace, the kind of strange story that spreads through a crowded city like wildfire, mutating slightly with each retelling. Was it louder near the rivers, near the castle, near certain temples? People compared notes trying to find a pattern, a source, anything that made sense. But the sound seemed frustratingly democratic in its appearances, sometimes heard vividly in one district, only faintly, or not at all in another, and then vice versa the next time it occurred. It was like a mischievous spirit playing hide-and-seek with the entire city. Their initial reactions covered the whole spectrum of human response to the unknown. Some were simply curious, fascinated by the sheer strangeness of it. Others were annoyed finding the sound disruptive and inexplicable. But for many, particularly in an era steeped in belief in spirits, demons, and the power of the earth itself, the reaction was fear. Unexplained noises from the ground are rarely good news, especially in a country prone to earthquakes. Was this a warning? A prelude to disaster? The rumbling stomach of a giant subterranean creature? The activity of Oni demons or other malevolent forces underground? These were very real possibilities in the minds of many Edo residents. It's easy for us living in a more scientifically minded age mostly to dismiss such fears as mere superstition. But put yourself in their straw sandals for a moment. Your life is hard, often precarious. The world is full of unseen forces. Why wouldn't a strange drumming from below be something ominous? Early speculations ran wild, fueled by a lack of concrete evidence and a fertile imagination. Perhaps it was construction, maybe some secret tunneling project ordered by the shogun, but the sound didn't quite fit, and the sheer scale and persistence seemed unlikely for mere construction. Perhaps it was natural underground springs, geothermal activity. But again, the rhythmic nature felt too deliberate, too much like well drumming. Maybe it was geological, a strange resonance within the Earth's layers. Japan is a seismically active zone, after all, sitting on multiple tectonic plates. The ground beneath Edo isn't just dirt. It's a complex geological mix of alluvial deposits, volcanic ash, and underlying bedrock. Could there be a natural phenomenon that caused a rhythmic sound? It's not impossible, but explaining a drumming sound naturally was a stretch even for the most scientifically inclined minds of the era, which, let's be honest, were focused on different things than seismology as we know it. Then, of course, there were the supernatural explanations. This is Edo, remember, a city where folklore breathed down your neck. Every shadow could hide a yokai. Every unusual event had the potential to be the work of spirits. The drumming could be caused by subterranean creatures, perhaps giant earthworms, or mole-like yokai digging vast tunnels. It could be the sound of powerful spirits locked in battle beneath the surface. It could even be interpreted as a direct message from the earth spirits themselves, warning the populace of some impending doom. Historians still argue whether the supernatural explanations were the dominant interpretation among the general populace, or merely one set of theories among many. It's hard to gauge the prevalence of such beliefs from the limited records available. What's frustrating for us looking back is the lack of formal, detailed documentation from this early period. The shogunate government in Edo was a vast bureaucracy, but they were primarily concerned with maintaining order, collecting taxes, and enforcing their rigid social hierarchy. Strange noises from underground didn't exactly fit neatly into their administrative categories. Unless the drumming was directly causing panic or seemed linked to a security threat, It's unlikely to have warranted a dedicated investigation unit or extensive record keeping. Think about it. If people today started reporting a mysterious low hum beneath New York City, would it make front-page news and trigger a massive government task force immediately? Probably not. It would likely be a fringe news story dismissed by most, and perhaps investigated only half-heartedly by local agencies, if enough complaints piled up. Edo was similar, but without our modern infrastructure for reporting and investigation. So the early accounts we have are piecemeal. They come from scattered sources, mentions in personal diaries, collections of strange tales, Kidan, maybe even hinted at in letters between individuals. A quirky tidbit that sometimes pops up in these early discussions is the idea that the sound was louder or more frequent during certain weather conditions like heavy rain or before a storm. This might suggest a link to groundwater levels or atmospheric pressure, hinting at a possible natural cause, but the connection was never definitively proven and remained in the realm of anecdotal observation. Another peculiar aspect noted by some was that animals, particularly dogs, seemed to react to the sound barking uneasily or showing signs of distress when the drumming began. This lent credence to the idea that the sound was a physical phenomenon, perhaps a low-frequency vibration, rather than purely psychological or supernatural, but it didn't explain what was causing the vibration. These early years, whenever exactly they were marked by confusion and speculation. The drumming was a mystery without a detective, a problem without a solution. It existed in the background of daily life, a persistent, unsettling presence that defied easy explanation. It wasn't a major historical event, not like the Great Fire of Mereki in 1657 that devastated the city, or the arrival of Commodore Perry in 1853 that shook Japan to its core. But for the people who lived with it, the drumming was a small, personal, historical event happening beneath their feet. It was a challenge to their understanding of the solid earth they stood on, a reminder that even the most familiar ground could harbor secrets. Consider this: Edo had a highly structured society. Your place was determined by birth, your life governed by rules and traditions. The physical city itself was a reflection of this order, with distinct districts for samurai, merchants, artisans, and so on. There was a sense of everything having its proper place. The drumming from below disrupted this sense of order. It was an intrusion from the unknown, a rogue element in a carefully controlled environment. It was noise where there should be silence, or at least predictable city noise movement where there should be stillness. For many, it became a topic of quiet obsession. People would listen intently, trying to pinpoint the direction, the source of the pattern. They would share their experiences, seeking confirmation and shared understanding. Was it just a trick of the light, or rather a trick of the ear? Was it psychosomatic, a product of stress or anxiety? But when multiple people in different locations reported hearing the same distinct rhythmic sound, it became harder to dismiss. It gained a kind of collective reality, even if its origins remained stubbornly obscure. This shared mystery, this common experience of hearing the inexplicable, might have even forged a strange kind of bond between people who otherwise had little in common, cutting across the rigid social lines of Edo society, if only in the shared confusion and wonder of it all. The stage was set. The phenomenon was noted, discussed, and speculated upon. It had moved from an isolated oddity to a known, albeit still unexplained, feature of life in certain parts of Edo. It was a historical footnote, perhaps, but one that pointed towards deeper, stranger truths about the city and the earth beneath it. As the years passed and the drumming continued its sporadic appearances, the need for a more concrete explanation, or at least a more official acknowledgement, would grow. But for now, in these early days, it remained largely in the realm of whispered theories and nervous glances downwards. You are living through the period when the mystery is being born, when the strange sound is just starting to etch itself into the collective consciousness of Edo. That persistent rhythm, that low thrumming you felt in the soles of your feet as you walked Edo's busy streets, began to shift from a strange, isolated anomaly to a topic of increasing, albeit still nervous, conversation. It wasn't just the whispers in the back alleys or the hushed tones in tea houses anymore. The sheer volume of anecdotal reports, scattered and inconsistent as they were started to reach ears that mattered, or at least ears connected to the administrative apparatus of the city. Edo wasn't just a collection of neighborhoods. It was a meticulously organized capital governed by the shogunate, At the local level, much of the day-to-day administration, including maintaining order, resolving disputes, and addressing public concerns, within reason, of course, fell to the Machi Bugyo, the city magistrates. These officials, usually 2 in number, overseen by higher authorities, were powerful figures, responsible for the well-being and control of the civilian population in their respective areas of the city. They had their own constables and networks of informants. While their primary concerns were crime fires and enforcing Tokugawa laws, enough reports of this unnerving underground sound eventually crossed their desks or reached their ears through their channels. Imagine being a Machi Bugyo in your office, dealing with a dispute over property lines, reports of petty theft, and then receiving a complaint from a reputable merchant that his sleep is being disturbed by rhythmic knocking coming from underneath his shop. At first they might dismiss it, perhaps noisy neighbors or construction work you weren't aware of. But when similar reports start arriving from different districts with varying descriptions, but the same core complaint of an inexplicable sound from below, it becomes harder to ignore entirely. So in this phase, you start to see the first tentative steps towards an official acknowledgement and perhaps even an investigation. Don't picture a modern police procedural, mind you. There weren't forensic teams or geophones being deployed. This was 17th or 18th century Edo. The investigation was much more rudimentary. It likely began with the Machi Bugyo, ordering their constables or lower-ranking samurai on patrol to pay closer attention. Listen out for strange sounds from the ground. They might have been instructed, probably with a healthy dose of skepticism or even an eye roll from the constables who had more pressing matters like catching thieves or making sure people weren't wearing silk when they weren't supposed to. Individuals might be dispatched to areas where the sound was most frequently reported. Their methods were simple: listen intently, observe if anyone or anything nearby seemed unusual, ask questions quietly. Imagine a constable kneeling down in a quiet street at night, pressing an ear to the packed earth, trying to distinguish the alleged drumming from the chirping of crickets, the distant calls of night vendors, or the creaks and groans of wooden buildings settling. It's a bit like trying to find a specific hum in a room full of refrigerators, except the refrigerators are hidden and turn on randomly. A truly fascinating and likely frustrating job description, official ground listener. The route probably didn't come with a fancy uniform. The challenges were immense. As you learned earlier, the sound was sporadic. An investigator might spend hours in a reported location, hearing nothing but the usual urban nocturne. Then the next night, the drumming might start up vibrantly 3 districts away. Pinpointing a source in a dense, sprawling city built largely of wood and packed earth was incredibly difficult, especially when the sound seemed to travel and resonate in unpredictable ways. Was it directly beneath you, or was it originating far away and simply echoing through the ground? Without any understanding of seismic waves or acoustics in this context, it was pure guesswork. They might try digging small holes in the ground in reported hotspots, hoping to find what exactly: a hidden drum, a subterranean monster. More likely, they just found dirt, maybe some tangled roots or a lost Geta sandal left behind by a late-night reveler. Report dug hole found only dirt and 1 slightly chewed sandal. No drumming detected. Riveting stuff for the official records. These early attempts were often shrouded in a degree of secrecy, or at least discretion. The authorities didn't want to cause widespread panic. Public order was paramount. Acknowledging that there was a mysterious, inexplicable sound coming from under the city floor could lead to fear rumors of ill omen or even suggestions that the shogunate wasn't in complete control. A dangerous idea in Tokugawa, Japan. So any investigations were likely kept low-key, relying on the existing network of officials and informers, rather than public announcements or large-scale operations. However, the very act of sending officials to listen to ask questions confirmed that the drumming was not merely the imaginings of a few nervous citizens. It had reached a level of persistence and widespread reporting that demanded some form of response, even if that response was quiet observation and frustrated head-scratching. This phase marks the transition from folklore to a documented, albeit still unsolved, problem within the city's consciousness. The motivations for these initial investigations were likely mixed. For the Machi Bugyo, it was likely a matter of administrative duty, responding to persistent complaints, ensuring public order wasn't threatened. If the drumming was causing widespread fear or disrupting business, it became their problem. For some lower-level officials, there might have been genuine curiosity or even fear. They lived in the same city after all, and probably heard the stories, maybe even the sound itself. A quirky tidbit that sometimes emerges from historical accounts of Edo administration is the intricate system of neighborhood associations where heads of blocks, gonengumi, were responsible for reporting on their neighbors, including any unusual occurrences. It's possible these blockheads were quietly instructed to note any instances of the drumming, creating a diffuse network of unofficial listeners scattered across the city. This decentralized reporting system, while thorough for social control, made it incredibly difficult to centralize and analyze information about a geographically elusive phenomenon like the drumming. Despite the efforts, these early investigations largely failed to yield concrete answers. No source was found, no definitive explanation emerged. The sound remained a mystery. This period of tentative inquiry served less to solve the problem and more to officially validate its existence. It was no longer just that strange thing some people hear. It was that strange thing the constables were told to listen for. This subtle shift in status didn't make it any less frightening or annoying for the residents, but it brought it one step closer to becoming a recognized part of Edo's well-boring history. Imagine yourself living through this. You hear the drumming. You talk to your neighbors who also hear it. You might see a constable lingering near your house one evening, perhaps bending down near the ground when he thinks no one is looking. You know, they know about it now. Does that make you feel safer? Or does it make you wonder why, with all the power and resources of the shogunate, they can't figure out something as seemingly simple as where a sound is coming from? Historians still argue whether the shogunate's initial approach to the drumming was genuinely aimed at understanding the phenomenon or primarily focused on managing public perception and preventing panic. Was it a scientific for the era inquiry or purely a matter of social control? The limited records make it difficult to definitively say. The lack of success in these early phases would naturally lead to increased speculation and perhaps a return to less conventional explanations. If the authorities with their resources couldn't find a mundane cause, maybe the cause wasn't mundane at all. The supernatural theories, never far below the surface in Edo society, likely gained renewed traction among the populace. Was it angry spirits? A sign from the kami gods? The stirrings of some ancient buried entity? This phase also likely saw the emergence of more formal written accounts, even if they were internal memos or reports that didn't survive the centuries. Imagine a weary clerk penning a report to the Machibugyo. Subject reports of subterranean rhythmic disturbances. Frequency intermittent. Locations various. Source undetermined. Recommendations continued observation discretion advised. Doesn't exactly strike fear into the hearts of subterranean drummers, does it? This period of early frustrating investigation established the drumming as a recognized phenomenon within Edo, but also underscored the profound difficulty of understanding it. It wasn't something that could be easily seen, captured, or explained using the knowledge and tools available at the time. It existed in the dark beneath the surface, literally and figuratively. And as the years turned into decades and the drumming continued its mysterious appearances, the question wouldn't go away. It would simply deepen, becoming part of the fabric of the city's folklore, a persistent, unanswered question, rumbling beneath the structured surface of Tokugawa rule. It's a fascinating contrast. The highly ordered, meticulously controlled society of Edo, with its strict rules and clear hierarchies, sitting atop something so unpredictable and defiant of explanation. The drumming was a tiny crack in the polished surface, a reminder that even in a world where everything had its place, there were still mysteries that lay literally underfoot. And as the authorities fumbled with their early attempts to understand it, the people of Edo continued to live with the sound, interpreting it through the lens of their own beliefs, fears, and limited understanding of the world beneath their feet. The stage was set for the drumming to become not just a strange noise, but a legendary enigma. You remember the frustration, right? The officials, the Machibugyo, and their constables poking around, listening intently, probably looking utterly bewildered as they tried to make sense of a sound that defied their ordered world. Their investigations, limited by the technology and understanding of the era, hit a wall. They couldn't find a source. They couldn't stop it. And when logical explanations fail, when the official channels run dry, where do people turn? In Edo, Japan, a society saturated with spirits, myths, and the ever-present awareness of forces beyond human control, you turn to the stories. You turn to the legends that explain the inexplicable. The rhythmic drumming became fertile ground for the imagination. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was an omen, a message, the activity of something unseen and powerful. You'd hear the theories whispered in the bathhouses, muttered in the bustling fish markets, or shared nervously over cups of tea. Forget hidden construction work or leaky pipes. The explanations escalated quickly from the mundane to the truly fantastical. And honestly, wouldn't you rather blame a mischievous Oni demon for keeping you awake than just random underground noise? At least an Oni is a classic villain with a backstory. One of the most persistent types of explanation revolved around the idea of creatures beneath the earth. Japanese folklore is rich with tales of underground dwellers. While the most famous might be the giant Namazu, the catfish whose thrashing tail causes earthquakes, a legend everyone in earthquake-prone Japan knew well. The drumming wasn't an earthquake. It was rhythmic, deliberate. This suggested a different kind of subterranean resident. Perhaps it was a colossal, ancient serpent slowly uncoiling or beating its tail against the deep earth. Or maybe it was something less monstrous but equally mysterious, like the Tsuchinoko. A legendary, elusive, fat, snake-like creature said to occasionally make strange sounds, though usually above ground. The scale of the drumming, however, pointed to something much, much bigger. Some stories spoke of underground caverns, hidden realms beneath the city, where strange beings resided. The drumming was their activity. Maybe they were forging weapons, pounding out some subterranean ceremony, or perhaps it was simply the sound of their massive hearts beating. Imagine picturing this beneath your feet as you walked home at night. Not just pavement and dirt, but a vast dark world populated by unseen entities whose very existence manifested as that unnerving rhythm. It added a whole new layer of dread to your commute. Just a quick walk home. Oh God, is that the sound of underground heartbeats again? Then there were the more spiritual explanations. Edo society held deep reverence for the kami, the spirits that inhabited the natural world and sometimes man-made objects. Could the drumming be the work of an angry earth? Kami displeased with the city's growth or some transgression? Or perhaps it was related to the Buddhist understanding of the underworld. Jigoku? Was it the sound of lost souls being tormented or the hammers of the demon wardens? Given the rhythmic nature, some might even speculate it was part of some dark, infernal ritual happening far below. This blended the physical phenomenon with profound religious and spiritual anxieties. If the sound was spiritual, it was even harder for earthly authorities like the shogunate to address. You can't arrest a kami, after all. Though knowing Edo bureaucracy, they might issue a formal complaint to the local shrine. The yokai were, of course, prime suspects. This vast category of supernatural monsters, ghosts, and strange phenomena offered endless possibilities. Could it be a tengu, the mountain and forest goblins who sometimes play drums, but somehow manifesting their rhythms underground? Or perhaps a lesser-known yokai associated specifically with earth or sound? There's a yokai called the Yama-uba, a mountain hag sometimes associated with strange mountain noises. But transplanting her underground felt like a stretch even for Edo rumor mills. More likely candidates were earthbound spirits, or those associated with hidden places. The specific nature of the sound, rhythmic drumming, made it distinct from other spooky noises like wailing ghosts or creaking houses. It suggested agency, a deliberate action. Someone or something was making that sound on purpose. Think about how these stories spread, not through official gazettes or public announcements, but through word-of-mouth shared experiences and fear. You'd hear it from a neighbor who swore their grandfather heard the same sound decades ago, or from a traveling merchant who claimed to know a villager whose well once echoed with a similar rhythm. Each telling added new details, new interpretations, sometimes exaggerating the sound's intensity or duration. It became a localized legend, adapting to the specific fears and beliefs of different neighborhoods. Perhaps in one district known for its temples, the stories focused on vengeful spirits. While in a merchant district, people might whisper about ancient treasures being guarded by drumming earth creatures. The artistic and theatrical life of Edo also played a role. Folk tales and ghost stories were immensely popular in kabuki theater and woodblock prints. While there's no direct evidence of a specific underground drummer of Edo, the climate of belief in the supernatural was constantly reinforced by popular culture. Seeing stories of yokai and spirits brought to life on stage made the idea of an unseen force drumming beneath the city feel less like pure fantasy and more like a plausible, albeit terrifying reality within their worldview. One mainstream historical fact relevant here is the deep animism present in Japanese folk religion, Shinto. Everything from mountains and rivers to ancient trees and even tools could potentially house a kami. This made it very natural for Edo residents to attribute an unusual natural phenomenon, like the drumming, to the actions of a powerful spirit associated with the earth itself. The ground beneath the city wasn't just inert dirt, it was potentially alive with spiritual energy, capable of expressing displeasure or simply being in ways humans couldn't comprehend. The authorities, having failed to provide a rational explanation, were in a difficult position. While they publicly maintained an image of control and order, one couldn't help but wonder if privately even some officials entertained these superstitious fears. They lived in the same society, heard the same whispers, and likely felt the same unsettling vibrations occasionally. Imagine a stern samurai constable outwardly scoffing at tales of underground demons, but perhaps making a small offering at a local shrine just in case after a particularly loud night of drumming. A slightly awkward moment. Yes, just ensuring civic harmony, kami-sama, and maybe keep the subterranean noise down. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to these beliefs is the concept of shintogan, shindangti, a kind of divination using sounds or other subtle signs to predict future events. While not directly tied to the drumming, the existence of such practices shows a cultural readiness to interpret unusual sounds as meaningful omens. Some people might have tried to read the drumming. Was a faster tempo a sign of imminent trouble? A slower, deeper beat a sign of calm? This turned the terrifying unknown into a potentially, if terrifyingly, communicative phenomenon. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of these folkloric explanations was purely a reflection of genuine belief, or if it also served as a form of coping mechanism for an urban population facing the anxieties of dense living, strict social control, and the sheer randomness of unexplained events. Was it easier to believe in a mythic monster than to admit the city was built on something fundamentally unstable or unknowable? The lack of detailed personal diaries explicitly discussing fear of underground demons makes it hard to definitively gauge the level of literal belief versus symbolic interpretation. The drumming, therefore, wasn't just a sound, it became a catalyst for storytelling, a canvas onto which the collective anxieties and beliefs of Edo were projected. It reinforced the boundary between the known ordered world of the shogunate and the mysterious, often frightening realm of the supernatural that lay just beyond human understanding, sometimes literally just beneath their feet. The more the mundane investigations failed, the stronger the pull of the magical and monstrous explanations became. This period solidified the drumming's status as an enigma, something that transcended simple physical phenomena. It was becoming part of the city's character, a unique thread in the tapestry of Edo folklore. Future generations would grow up hearing about the mysterious underground drumming, not just as a historical event, but as a legend passed down, often embellished and integrated into other tales of ghosts and yokai. You living through this felt the shift. The sound was no longer just confusing or annoying. It carried the weight of these potential explanations. That low thrumming could now be the shudder of a giant creature, the distant beat of an infernal drum, or the angry pulse of the earth spirit. The darkness beneath the city streets felt deeper, more populated, and infinitely more mysterious. The mundane inconvenience of a strange noise had transformed into a brush with the possibly terrifying, possibly sacred unknown. And knowing that even the authorities couldn't figure it out only amplified the sense that this was something truly beyond the ordinary. It's a classic human response to the unknown, isn't it? When faced with something baffling, something that defies logic and investigation, we create stories. We populate the darkness with figures we can understand, even if those figures are monstrous or divine. The drumming beneath Edo was a perfect blank slate for this process. It existed undeniably, but its source was hidden, allowing the collective imagination to run wild, drawing from centuries of established folklore and belief. And so the rhythmic pounding transitioned from a mere annoyance to a legend, a testament to the vibrant, complex relationship between the people of Edo and the unseen world they believed surrounded and perhaps even pulsed beneath them. So the official probes by the Machibugyo had fizzled out, leaving a void where rational explanation should have been. And as you know, nature abhors a vacuum, but Edo society really abhorred a vacuum filled with unexplained rhythmic noise. The folklore, the tales of angry earth spirits and subterranean monsters rushed in to fill that void, swirling around the city like dust devils in a dry season. But these weren't just campfire stories. In a society deeply imbued with spiritual beliefs, the unexplained often demanded a more structured response. When the secular authorities couldn't solve a problem, people often turned to the sacred. Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines were central to life in Edo, offering solace, guidance, and a framework for understanding a sometimes bewildering world. It was natural then for the drumming to become a matter for religious contemplation and potential intervention. If the sound was caused by something supernatural, maybe a supernatural solution was needed. You'd see people heading to their local temple, perhaps, lighting incense, not just for ancestors, but with a quiet, anxious prayer about the unsettling sounds coming from down there. At Shinto shrines, offerings might be made to the local Ujigami guardian spirit, or specifically to Earth Kami, asking for the noise to cease or for protection from whatever was causing it. These weren't large orchestrated events initially, but individual acts of faith born from a mix of fear and hope. Imagine yourself dropping a coin into the offering box, the rhythmic thudding potentially audible even from the shrine grounds, making your plea feel all the more urgent. Okay, Kami-sama, about that whole subterranean percussion situation, any chance you could quiet things down? Thanks. As the drumming persisted and the folkloric explanations grew, the religious institutions themselves might have started incorporating the phenomenon into their discourse. A Buddhist priest might speak of the drumming as a manifestation of earthly suffering or karmic repercussions, perhaps urging parishioners to meditate more deeply or perform good deeds to purify the city's spiritual atmosphere. A Shinto priest might lead prayers or purification rituals aimed at appeasing potentially disturbed earth spirits or warding off negative energy associated with the noise. Some temples and shrines were known for their specific connections to the earth or underground realms. For instance, shrines dedicated to Inari, the spirit of rice agriculture and prosperity, often have associations with foxes who sometimes burrow underground. While the drumming wasn't typically linked directly to Inari folklore, the concept of sacred forces operating beneath the surface was already present in the religious landscape. Perhaps the drumming was interpreted as a sign that neglected earth deities needed renewed attention. The drumming could also become a point of theological debate within religious orders. Was this a sign from the divine, a test or a punishment? Was it an inherently malevolent force, or simply a powerful natural but spiritual phenomenon that needed to be understood and integrated into their worldview? These discussions, while perhaps not public knowledge, would have shaped the advice and rituals offered to the anxious populace. Consider the concept of geomancy or feng shui. Though the Japanese term fusui is more appropriate, which was known and practiced in some circles, particularly among the elite, and in the planning of important structures. While not a mainstream religion itself, it's a system of belief dealing with the flow of energy through the land. The drumming could easily be interpreted as a disruption of this vital energy flow, a sign that the Qi Yuan was blocked or agitated beneath the city. This might lead to calls for specific structural adjustments, placement of protective talismans, or realignment efforts based on fusui principles, potentially involving religious figures or specialists in these arts. You might find yourself wondering if rearranging your furniture according to ancient principles would help quiet the noise coming from your floorboards. Spoiler alert, it probably wouldn't, but hey, worth a shot. Right, religious ceremonies intended for other purposes might take on new significance in the shadow of the drumming. Festivals related to earth deities, purification rituals, or ceremonies asking for stability and peace could become more fervent with the unspoken hope that they might somehow placate whatever was making the racket underground. Imagine a procession through the streets, the rhythmic beating of the taiko drums above ground, momentarily seeming to sync or clash with the deeper unseen rhythm below. Was that a call and response, a challenge, or just a coincidence that sent shivers down your spine? A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era touches upon the belief in underground chambers used for ascetic practices or housing powerful relics. Some whispered that the drumming might be related to ancient hermits or powerful monks who had sealed themselves away underground centuries ago, their spiritual practice, or the vibrations from their relics somehow manifesting as sound. This blended religious devotion with the mystery of the deep earth, suggesting the drumming was not a demon's work, but the inadvertent sound of profound spiritual power. It's a slightly more positive spin than angry demons, but still involves the unsettling idea of hidden powerful beings just meters beneath your feet. One mainstream historical fact is the significant role played by Buddhist temples, particularly during the Edo period, in serving as local administrative centers, census keepers, temple registration, teraki, unaikun, system, and providers of social welfare alongside their spiritual functions. This meant they were deeply integrated into the fabric of daily life. If a community was experiencing a widespread inexplicable phenomenon, like the drumming, it was natural that the local temple would be a focal point for worry prayer and collective action, or attempts at action. The priests weren't just religious figures. They were community leaders whose interpretation of events carried weight. However, just as with the official investigations, the religious responses faced limitations. Prayers and rituals offered spiritual comfort and a sense of agency, but they didn't physically stop the noise. This could lead to disillusionment or a search for alternative explanations, even within the religious framework. Perhaps the initial rituals weren't the right ones, or the spiritual force was too powerful or too displeased to be easily appeased. Historians still argue whether these religious and folkloric interpretations genuinely represented the dominant understanding of the drumming among the majority of Edo residents, or if they were primarily narratives used by the less educated or those seeking comfort in tradition, while more pragmatic, if equally unsuccessful, attempts were made elsewhere. Were these beliefs deeply held convictions driving action, or simply stories people told to make sense of something terrifyingly random, a way to impose a narrative onto chaos? It's hard to know how many people genuinely believed an underground monster was drumming versus how many found solace in the telling of such tales. The persistence of the drumming, despite prayers and rituals, might have inadvertently reinforced certain fatalistic beliefs or a sense of the immense untamable power of the earth in the spiritual world. It suggested that some things were simply beyond human control, whether governmental or spiritual. This could breed a quiet resignation among the populace, a background hum of acceptance that the drumming was just part of living in Edo, like the heat of summer or the dampness of the rainy season, but with a touch more existential dread. You going about your day might participate in a neighborhood prayer led by a local priest murmuring along with the ancient sutras or Shinto prayers while keeping one ear tuned to the faint persistent thrumming below. The sound became an uninvited participant in even sacred moments, a constant reminder of the unknown lying beneath the veneer of daily life and established order. It blended the sacred and the unsettling in a uniquely Edo way. Even within the religious community, the lack of a clear, identifiable source for the drumming was problematic. Unlike a specific natural disaster that could be attributed to a certain deity's anger or a specific set of past actions, the drumming was continuous and enigmatic. This ambiguity allowed for a wide range of interpretations, sometimes contradictory, further adding to the city's confused response. Was it earth spirits, hell realms, ancient hermits? The uncertainty itself was unsettling. The drumming also highlighted the boundary between the physical world and the spiritual one. While religious belief was pervasive, the persistent physical sensation of the drumming forced a confrontation with the idea that spiritual forces could have tangible, even annoying effects on the material world. It blurred the lines in a way that was both fascinating and frightening. Ultimately, the religious responses, while providing spiritual frameworks and coping mechanisms, couldn't silence the drums. Like the official investigations, they reached an impasse against an invisible, intangible adversary. This failure, though, perhaps expected in dealing with the supernatural, contributed to the deepening mystery and the eventual integration of the drumming into the city's folklore and identity as an enduring, inexplicable phenomenon. It wasn't just a sound you heard. It was a sound that spurred prayers, rituals, and anxious whispers, becoming woven into the spiritual fabric of the city itself. So the officials threw up their hands, the priests offered their prayers, and still that maddening rhythm continued its relentless thrumming beneath the city. With the avenues of formal investigation and spiritual intervention exhausted or at least proving fruitless, the stage was set for the ultimate free-for-all of speculation public opinion. When experts and holy people are stumped, you better believe everyone else has a theory. And Edo, with its millions of curious, sometimes anxious residents, was no exception. Imagine yourself walking through the bustling streets, dodging carts and street vendors, the air thick with the smell of roasting skewers and sewage. Yes, Edo had a thriving night soil industry, let's just say that. And underneath it all, that baseline. Naturally, conversations would drift toward the topic. Heard anything new about the drumming? Kenji, nah, same old noise, kinda makes you jumpy, huh? And then the theories would start. People looked for practical, even if unusual explanations. What happens under the city? Well, there were sewers, but they were mostly open ditches or shallow covered channels, not deep tunnels causing vibrations. There were wells, thousands of them providing water, but how would a well make a rhythmic drumming noise unless someone was seriously messing with the bucket rope down there and doing it citywide? Unlikely. Then there was construction. Edo was constantly being built and rebuilt. Fires were frequent, destroying large swathes of the city, which then had to be reconstructed quickly. Daimyo residences were vast estates with complex foundations and underground storage. Could it be some massive secret construction project happening beneath the surface? Maybe they were building something huge, something that required deep digging and rhythmic pounding. But what and why the secrecy? And why was it happening everywhere? If it was just one site, you'd only hear it nearby. This widespread nature was key to the mystery. Some theories focused on underground water. Edo was built on a delta crisscrossed by rivers and canals. Was there some strange hydrological phenomenon happening underground? Could subterranean currents interacting with specific geological formations create a percussive sound? Perhaps underground springs or even trapped pockets of water resonating in some bizarre way. It felt like reaching. But when the official explanation is Dano, and the religious one is maybe angry spirits, suddenly underground water physics sounds almost reasonable. You might picture vast unseen rivers flowing deep beneath your feet, carrying not water, but sound waves. Or perhaps it was a giant subterranean water drum just waiting for its cue. Okay, maybe that's pushing it, but you get the idea. Then came the geological explanations. Edo was in a seismically active region. Earthquakes were a constant threat and a reality as the city suffered devastating ones over the centuries. Could the drumming be related to underground stress minor tremors or the movement of tectonic plates? While major earthquakes cause sudden violent shaking, could there be a slow, rhythmic grinding happening deep below? This felt plausible to many. The earth was alive, it moved, it groaned. Maybe this was just one of its stranger, more persistent groans. Of course, the precise, often consistent rhythm didn't quite fit the randomness of typical earth movements, which just added another layer of confusion. People might point to specific areas where the sound seemed stronger, asking if there was something unique about the geology there. Were there specific types of rock or soil that could resonate in this way? Were there underground caverns or voids that amplified sounds? Imagine people gathering near a spot where the drumming seemed particularly loud, tapping the ground, listening intently, hoping to glean some clue from the very earth beneath their feet. Yep, sounds louder here. Definitely under this tea house. Maybe the tea is amplifying it. More imaginative, even slightly fringe theories also gained traction in the public consciousness. Remember how we talked about folklore and spirits? What about literal physical beings underground? Tales of subterranean creatures, maybe not spirits, but physical entities, occasionally surfaced in different cultures. What if there was a species of enormous blind moles digging complex tunnel networks under the city? And their digging claws or some strange mating ritual caused the drumming? It sounds ridiculous now, but without scientific understanding of geology or seismic activity, a giant mole was as good a guess as an angry earth god, and perhaps easier to picture. Another quirky or fringe tidbit circulating might have involved buried historical artifacts or powerful objects. Perhaps ancient tombs or caches of magical items were buried deep beneath Edo, and the energy or resonance from these objects was causing the sound. This taps into the widespread belief in the power of relics and ancient sites. Maybe some long-lost treasure of a powerful samurai or even an ancient god was sealed away, and its latent power manifested as a rhythmic vibration. You might wonder if that old vase your neighbor dug up in his garden was causing the whole city's headache. Probably not, but hey, stranger things. A mainstream historical fact relevant here is the massive scale and complexity of Edo as one of the world's largest cities at the time. Its rapid growth, sprawling infrastructure, constant construction, and dense population meant that any widespread phenomenon would be experienced by millions and discussed endlessly. The sheer number of people living cheek by jowl ensured that rumors, theories, and anxieties about the drumming would spread like wildfire through the market's bathhouses and neighborhood streets. It wasn't a sound limited to one district. It was a sound that united the city in its shared, albeit bewildered, experience. This density amplified the mystery and the public's need to understand it. The marketplace, the public bathhouse, the local sake shop, these were the true melting pots of Edo gossip and theory crafting. You'd overhear snippets of conversations. My cousin in Nihonbashi says it sounds like giants hammering. Nonsense, my uncle, a scholar, says it's geological stress. Old man Tanaka thinks it's the restless spirits of those executed at Suzugamori. Everyone had an opinion, often based on their own background beliefs, or whatever far-fetched rumor they'd heard last. It was the original social media, just slower and smellier. Some people might have tried their own amateur investigations, lying flat on the ground in a quiet alley late at night trying to pinpoint the direction or source, holding an ear to the base of an old stone wall, tapping the ground with their foot in a rhythm, hoping for a response, which, let's be honest, would be deeply unsettling if it actually happened. These were small personal attempts to solve a massive impersonal mystery born out of simple human curiosity and a desire to feel less powerless. Was the drumming different in different parts of the city? Some claimed it was louder in the low-lying Shitamachi areas. Others swore it was stronger near the castle or the Yamanoti Hills. These anecdotal observations, likely influenced by local ambient noise and personal perception, added more conflicting data points to the confused public understanding. You'd argue with a friend from across town, no way, it's definitely faster over my way. You're imagining things, it's a steady beat here. Amidst the speculation, some individuals or groups might have capitalized on the fear and uncertainty. Quacks selling anti-drumming talismans or potions made of, crocodile dung-adjacent ingredients maybe. Soothsayers claiming to commune with the underground forces and offering expensive interpretations or rituals. It was fertile ground for exploitation, preying on people's anxiety about an invisible threat. You might be tempted to buy a small, oddly shaped rock from a shifty-looking character who swears it absorbs subterranean vibrations. Only 50 monenaire, guaranteed to reduce drumming by, well, at least some amount. Historians still argue whether these myriad public theories held significant sway over the city's overall mood, or if they were mostly idle chatter that provided a coping mechanism, a way to talk about the fear without succumbing to it entirely. Did people genuinely believe in giant moles, or was it just a more palatable, slightly humorous explanation than the terrifying unknown? It's difficult to gauge the true depth of conviction behind these speculative discussions centuries later. Were they serious attempts at understanding, or just ways to fill the silence between the beats? The persistence of the drumming, coupled with the lack of any single convincing explanation from any quarter, official, religious, or popular, allowed the mystery to deepen and become entrenched in the city's identity. It wasn't just a temporary phenomenon. It was a persistent, inexplicable feature of life. In Edo, a topic for endless discussion, a source of low-grade anxiety, and a breeding ground for increasingly outlandish theories. The drumming became an accepted strangeness, a part of the urban landscape, like the cry of the street vendor or the splash of oars in the canal. You living your life in Edo might find yourself unconsciously tapping your foot to the rhythm sometimes. You'd hear people talking about it, shaking their heads, offering yet another bizarre theory. You'd smile politely, maybe add your own giant underground squirrels with tiny hammers perhaps, and then get back to buying your fish or haggling for cloth. The drumming was a mystery, yes, but life had to go on. And the public's endless stream of theories, while not solving anything, at least provided a sense of shared experience and a touch of dark humor in the face of the inexplicable. It was Edo's collective attempt to whistle past the graveyard, or perhaps past the giant mole's tunnel. The constant background noise also normalized the idea that strange things could just happen in a big complex city. It lowered the bar for what counted as weird. Oh, the sky is raining fish. Well, it's no giant underground drumming, is it? It created a slightly surreal layer to daily life, where the impossible seemed just a little bit more possible. And every time you felt that faint thrumming through the tatami mat floor of your home, you were reminded that you lived in a city that held secrets deep within its earth. So you've weathered the storm of official confusion, the gentle guidance, or maybe slightly panicked flailing of the priests, and the absolute tsunami of public opinion and increasingly bizarre theories. You've heard explanations ranging from sensible geology to underground moles with tiny hammers. But as the days bled into weeks and the weeks into months and the drumming just didn't stop, something else began to happen. People stopped looking up in fear or tapping the ground in hopeful investigation quite so much. They started living with it. Think about any annoying, persistent sound you've had in your life. A neighbor's slightly too loud music filter through the wall, a constantly dripping tap, the hum of an old refrigerator. At first, it drives you absolutely mad. You focus on it, you complain about it, you desperately wish it would stop. But eventually, subtly, your brain starts to filter it out. It becomes part of the background, just another layer in the complex symphony or maybe cacophony of your environment. That's what happened in Edo. The mysterious drumming, the source of so much initial anxiety and wild speculation, began its slow, insidious transition from terrifying anomaly to everyday noise. Imagine yourself getting ready for the day. You slide open the paper screens of your small home in the Nihonbashi district. Outside, the city is waking up. The first street vendors are setting up their calls faint in the distance. The clatter of wooden geta on the paving stones begins. The smell of morning fires starting, and underneath it all, the familiar rhythmic thrum. It's no longer a shock, no longer a jolt to your system. It's just there, like the distant barking of dogs or the nearby blacksmith's hammer. You'd walk to the market, the sound following you. Stand and haggle for vegetables, the vendor tapping his foot unconsciously to the beat as he argues the price. You'd sit in a tea house, the drumming a silent partner, to the quiet chatter and the pouring of hot water. At night, trying to sleep, the sound would still be there, a low vibration through the tatami mat. But perhaps you'd found ways to cope. Maybe you stuffed cotton in your ears, or maybe you discovered that focusing on the sound actually helped some people fall asleep like a bizarre underground metronome. Though I can't imagine that worked for everyone. For some, it probably just made the sleepless nights even more frustrating. Okay, beat 1, beat 2, beat 3. Just stop already. This adaptation wasn't a conscious decision for most people. It was a gradual psychological shift. The constant state of alarm or intense curiosity was simply unsustainable. You couldn't live every hour wondering if it was angry spirits or giant moles, remember those guys. Still maybe digging? Life in Edo was busy. There were jobs to do, families to feed, social obligations, festivals to attend. The drumming, while undeniably present, didn't stop any of that. So you adjusted. Children especially might have adapted fastest. Kids are incredible at normalizing weirdness. They might have initially been scared, but soon it was just part of the world they grew up in. Maybe they developed games around the rhythm, tapping out their own patterns in response, or using it as a beat for jumping rope or clapping games. Okay, on the 5th drum beat, you jump. It adds a whole new layer of challenge and potentially confusion to hopscotch. A mainstream historical fact about Edo life that facilitated this adaptation was the sheer resilience and pragmatic nature of its inhabitants. Edo was a city built on a floodplain, prone to fires and earthquakes. Life was often hard and unexpected disasters were a regular occurrence. People learned to be tough to rebuild and to carry on in the face of adversity. A constant, unexplained sound, while unsettling, was just another peculiar challenge in a life already full of them. They had bigger, more immediate problems to worry about, like making enough money to eat or ensuring their home didn't burn down in the next big fire. The drumming, for all its mystery, didn't pose an immediate physical threat, unlike a collapsing building or raging inferno. So it moved down the priority list. Consider the concept of sensory gating, your brain's ability to tune out constant, non-threatening stimuli. That's what was happening on a massive scale in Edo. The brain decided, okay, this sound has been happening for ages. It hasn't actually done anything harmful, so I'm going to file it under background noise and stop paying so much attention. It's like living near train tracks. Initially, the rumbling jolts you, but eventually you barely notice it unless the train is particularly loud or late. There were, of course, moments when the sound might still pierce through the normalized filter. Late at night, in the quietest hours when other city noises died down, the drumming might seem louder, more insistent. Or perhaps in moments of stress or anxiety, the sound that you usually tuned out would suddenly become prominent, again amplifying your unease. It was a constant, subtle reminder that something fundamentally inexplicable was happening beneath your feet. Did the city itself change physically because of the drumming? Not in any obvious way. People didn't abandon districts where it was louder, didn't build special dampening foundations as if they could even figure out how. Life continued in the houses, shops, and temples directly above the source, whatever it was. You just lived there and you heard the beat. It was the human element, the psychological and social adaptation, that was the most significant change. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this adaptation might involve the development of specific localized superstitions or minor rituals. Perhaps some households started leaving out small offerings near their wells, just in case the drumming was related to underground water spirits, a callback to those theories. Or maybe certain areas where the sound seemed stronger developed a reputation for being slightly off, or connected to the unseen world, leading people to avoid living there if they were particularly sensitive, or conversely attracting those drawn to mystery. Imagine a landlord trying to explain the constant thrumming to potential tenants. Characterful property, very acoustically interesting basement, adds a certain rhythm to your life. And rent is slightly lower. Obviously, people might have developed coping mechanisms that were more psychological than physical. Dark humor became a way to deal with the inexplicable. Jokes about the drumming likely circulated. Why did the samurai bring a drum to the tea house? Because he heard the city needed more rhythm. Okay, Edo jokes are hard across the centuries, but you get the idea. Humor as a release valve. Or perhaps they created folktales where the drumming was explained through fantastical stories, making it less scary by making it narrative. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of living with such a pervasive, unexplainable phenomenon had long-term effects on the collective psyche of Edo citizens. Was there a subtle increase in anxiety levels across the city? Did it foster a greater sense of living on uncertain ground, both literally and metaphorically? Or was it merely a curiosity, a weird backdrop that most people learned to ignore, proving the incredible capacity of humans to adapt to almost anything, even a giant underground drum circle? It's hard to say for sure, as personal accounts focusing specifically on the psychological impact are scarce. Most records focus on the search for the cause, not the experience of living with it once the search slowed down. The drumming became a shared experience that transcended social class. Whether you were a wealthy merchant in the refined districts or a laborer in the bustling Shitamachi, you heard and felt the same beat. It was a strange equalizer. You could be sitting in your elegant garden contemplating poetry and feel the same subterranean vibration as someone shoveling sewage into a cart. It was a secret rhythm that only the inhabitants of Edo shared. Even as official investigations faded and the wildest theories lost some of their novelty, the sound remained. It was a part of the city's identity, something unique to Edo. Visitors might comment on it, asking residents about the strange noise, only to be met with a shrug and a resigned smile. Oh, that's just the drumming. Been here for years. Nobody knows what it is. It was spoken of with a kind of weary familiarity, perhaps even a touch of pride in living in such a mysteriously vibrant or vibrating city. You living in Edo simply incorporated it. You might plan important meetings at times when the sound seemed slightly less noticeable, though that could just be confirmation bias. You might choose your dwelling based not just on location or price, but on whether the drumming felt particularly strong or weak there. It became another factor in the million tiny calculations that made up daily life in a massive complex metropolis. The drumming wasn't just background noise, it was a constant reminder of the unknown. It was proof that despite all the sophisticated social structures, the elaborate rituals, the vast administrative system of the shogunate, and the burgeoning knowledge of the world there were still fundamental mysteries right beneath their feet. It kept a small but significant sense of wonder, and perhaps unease, alive in the city long after the initial panic subsided. You might get used to the sound, but did you ever truly stop wondering? Probably not entirely. It was just that the wondering became less urgent, more like a quiet hum in the background of your thoughts, much like the drumming itself had become a quiet hum in the background of your life. So you've settled into the rhythm of the city, both the frantic pace of daily life and the steady subterranean pulse. You've gone from initial panic to weary resignation, from wild speculation to just tuning it out most of the time. The drumming for you and the vast majority of Edo's inhabitants became part of the furniture, a strange piece of the sonic landscape that was as familiar in its own way as the cries of the tofu seller or the splash of oars in the canal. But while you as an individual might have adapted, the fundamental mystery didn't magically disappear. It persisted unsolved generation after generation. Think about mysteries in our own time that grab headlines, dominate conversations, then slowly fade from the front page but never truly go away. Maybe a famous unsolved crime, a strange disappearance, a persistent conspiracy theory. People talk about it constantly. At first, police investigate, experts offer opinions, the media sensationalizes. But eventually, new news happens. Life moves on, and while the mystery isn't solved, the intense focus dissipates. It shifts from a burning question to a cold case or just a weird historical footnote. That's somewhat analogous to what happened with the drumming in Edo. But instead of fading into dusty archives, it faded into the city's consciousness, its folklore, its very identity. The official investigations, the shogunate's earnest but ultimately fruitless efforts to find a rational explanation or source eventually wound down. They dug test holes, questioned specialists, listened intently, probably scratched their heads a lot. You can just picture a stern-faced official tapping the ground with his fan, listening, then sighing dramatically. Still drumming, send for more geologists. Again. But with no culprit found, no geological fault identified that perfectly matched the rhythm, no giant mole cartel discovered the resources and political will to pursue it endlessly simply waned. There were, after all, rebellions to put down rice harvests to manage foreign ships to worry about eventually. A persistent, unexplained noise, while annoying and perhaps unsettling, wasn't an existential threat in the same way. So the active search stopped, or at least became much less public and intense. The priests who had offered prayers and sought spiritual explanations returned to their regular duties, perhaps still muttering about restless spirits under their breath, but no longer performing citywide exorcisms every Tuesday. The scholars who proposed scientific or pseudoscientific theories moved on to other intellectual puzzles. And the rumor mill, while never entirely quiet, no longer churned out new, wildly inventive explanations every single day. The initial tsunami of theories slowed to a gentle, persistent ripple. The drumming, however, didn't stop just because people stopped actively looking for the answer. It continued its rhythmic beat beneath the bustling streets. And over time, it transitioned from a current event, a problem to be solved, into a historical oddity, a local legend. Children born years after the drumming started didn't remember a time without it. For them, it wasn't an invasion of their sensory world. It was simply how the world was structured. It was just the way Edo sounded. Imagine yourself now, not in the initial days of panic, but perhaps 20, 30, 50 years later. You are an older person, maybe a grandparent. The city has changed. The buildings are different and the styles of dress have evolved. The shogun on the throne might be different, but the drumming is still there. You tell stories to your grandchildren about the great rumbling scare of your youth, about the crazy theories people had about the time the shogun's men dug up the main street looking for giant catfish, a popular mythological explanation for earthquakes often depicted as living underground. So, Grandpa, Your grandchild might ask, their ear pressed to the wooden floor, "What is it? Why does it drum?" And you'd have to shrug just like people did decades before. "Ah, little one," you'd say, perhaps with a wistful smile, "if only we knew. Some say it's the earth's heart beating. Some say it's the kami, the spirits dancing down below. Some old folks still whisper about those giant moles." See, they never completely went away. This is how folklore is born. An unexplained phenomenon persists, and in the absence of a definitive, verifiable answer, people create stories. These stories might incorporate elements of earlier theories, the spiritual, the mythological, even the slightly silly. They become part of the shared cultural memory passed down orally, maybe occasionally written down in personal diaries or local histories, but often residing primarily in conversations around the hearth or in tea houses. The drumming wasn't just a sound, it was a narrative hook. A mainstream historical fact that is relevant here is the rich tradition of Japanese folklore and superstition during the Edo period. This was a society deeply connected to nature, prone to explaining the inexplicable through the actions of spirits, kami ghosts, yurei, or various mythological creatures, yokai. Strange occurrences were often interpreted through this lens. So, a persistent, mysterious sound emanating from the ground was fertile ground for all sorts of fantastical explanations, even if the initial official response was more pragmatic or religious institutional. The drumming fit neatly into a cultural context where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was often blurred. It was easy to slot it into existing beliefs about underground realms or powerful entities. Consider how stories about the drumming might evolve. In one neighborhood, maybe it's tied to the local shrine's patron deity, who is said to be restless. In another, perhaps it's linked to the ghost of someone buried improperly nearby. Sailors returning from voyages might spin yarns about hearing the drumming far out in the harbor, connecting it to the ocean depths or sea creatures. The lack of a single agreed-upon source meant people were free to imagine their own, making the mystery even more ingrained and personalized across the city's diverse districts. The drumming also became a point of pride in a strange way. It was their mystery, Edo's unique secret. Visitors might comment on it, and residents would explain it with that mix of resignation and subtle ownership. Ah yes, the drumming. Welcome to Edo. It was a conversation starter, a shared experience that united the city's inhabitants, much like living in a city famous for its particular smell or a weird landmark. Like, imagine if Big Ben just started randomly drumming instead of chiming the hours. It would be utterly bizarre, but eventually Londoners would probably just be like, "Oh yeah, that's just Barry down in the basement practicing his drums. Don't mind him." A quirky or fringe tidbit that might emerge from this long period of acceptance could be the development of specific localized folk remedies or minor rituals associated with the sound. Perhaps pregnant women in certain areas were advised to avoid listening to the drumming too closely, fearing it might affect the unborn child, creating a sort of prenatal rhythm sensitivity. Or maybe certain street performers or musicians tried to synchronize their acts with the drumming, creating bizarre, unintentional collaborations with the subterranean world. Imagine a traditional shamisen player trying to keep time with the unpredictable beat coming from below. That would be a performance art piece for the ages, probably less sleepy ASMR and more mildly infuriating percussion workshop. Historians still argue whether the sustained presence of the drumming contributed to a particular characteristic of Edo culture, perhaps a subtle fatalism, an acceptance of the unpredictable, or a heightened sense of the uncanny lurking beneath the mundane. Did living with a constant, unsolvable mystery make people more open to other forms of strangeness, or did it simply reinforce their pragmatism and ability to tune things out? It's difficult to gauge the long-term collective psychological impact, as primary sources tend to focus on concrete events rather than pervasive atmospheric phenomena, like an unexplained sound that becomes background noise. The drumming was a constant reminder that despite the intricate order of Tokugawa Japan, with its strict social hierarchy, rigid laws, and carefully managed infrastructure, there were still forces and phenomena beyond human understanding and control. It was a crack in the perfectly polished surface of the shogunate's ordered world, and it remained a steadfast rhythmic enigma through decades, even centuries of Edo's history. Even as Edo transformed into Tokyo during the Meiji Restoration, and beyond the memory of the drumming persisted. Perhaps it was discussed less frequently as the city modernized, and new sounds like trains and factory whistles dominated the soundscape. Maybe the vibrations were masked by construction or new urban infrastructure, but the story, the legend of the mysterious drumming beneath the old city, remained part of the historical record and the collective memory. It became a historical curiosity, something you might read about in an old book or hear mentioned by a historian studying the Edo period. You, having lived through the initial shock and the long process of adaptation, carry this knowledge with you. You know it wasn't just a fleeting event, it was a fixture. It was the unsolved riddle that was woven into the very fabric of the city you called home. And even if you learned to ignore the sound most of the time, even if the initial fear turned into mere background awareness, you never truly forgot that somewhere deep beneath the world, you walked on something was drumming, and nobody ever figured out what. Which for a boring history podcast is actually quite exciting, isn't it? Okay, maybe exciting is a strong word. Mildly intriguing in a way that promotes relaxation is probably closer. It's a testament to the human capacity for adaptation, certainly, but also to the enduring power of mystery. A mystery that wasn't solved by technology or religion or sheer force of will. It just was. And Edo lived with it for centuries, one beat at a time. So the drumming didn't go away. It wasn't solved, wasn't silenced. It just kept on a persistent, rhythmic hum beneath the surface of your life and the life of Edo. And because it became a permanent fixture rather than a temporary crisis, it started to weave itself into the very fabric of the city's culture, not just as a source of fear or speculation, but as something else. Something that shaped the way people thought, talked, and even created. Think of it like a city landmark, but one you feel rather than see. Like if the Eiffel Tower suddenly started vibrating at a low frequency and nobody knew why. Initially, panic, investigations, protests. But if it kept vibrating for decades, eventually it would just become the vibrating tower. People would make jokes about it, maybe sell vibrating Eiffel Tower souvenirs. Terrible idea. Probably write poems about it, and tourists would ask, is that it vibrating? It transitions from anomaly to identity marker. That's what happened in Edo. The drumming became Edo's drumming. It wasn't just a sound, it was a shared experience, a collective mystery that everyone in the city, from the highest samurai to the lowest merchant, lived with every single day. And shared experiences, especially strange ones, have a way of fostering a unique cultural flavor. You'd start to see it pop up in unexpected places. In the theater, perhaps. Not necessarily a play about the drumming, though maybe a comedic no play, where a character keeps getting interrupted by the subterranean beat, but maybe subtle references woven into dialogue. A character might pause dramatically and say, "My heart beats with the rhythm of the earth below us." A line that would land differently for an Edo audience than for someone from, say, Kyoto. Or maybe a puppet show where a climactic scene is underscored by a low rhythmic thumping, mimicking the sound everyone knew so well. In literature, think of haiku or poems that touch on the drumming. A poet sitting by a canal might write, "Water laps, moon shines. Below the old earth is drumming. Night finds its slow beat." Simple, evocative, and grounding the natural world, and the man made the canal and the strange reality beneath their feet. It wasn't necessarily always ominous. Sometimes it could be framed poetically, a reflection of the deep, mysterious forces of nature, or even presented as a kind of comforting, steady presence in an uncertain world. Like a giant, unseen grandparent tapping their foot. The drumming might also influence visual arts, though perhaps more subtly. While there might not be a famous ukiyo-esha print titled "People Listening to the Drumming," though someone should make that, the sense of the ground being alive, of a hidden world beneath the surface, could bleed into artistic themes. Perhaps depictions of landscapes or cityscapes would carry a subtle sense of weight or vibration, or maybe artists would be inspired to depict underground scenes, mythical creatures, or geological formations in new ways, fueled by the constant reminder of what lay unseen below. Even everyday language might incorporate references. Proverbs or sayings could emerge. As steady as the drumming might mean something reliable, while offbeat like the drumming could describe something erratic or unpredictable, since the rhythm, while steady, wasn't necessarily perfectly metronomic all the time, remember? Someone might describe feeling anxious as their heart drumming like the earth. These kinds of linguistic fossilizations show how deeply something has embedded itself in the shared consciousness. Think about how local superstitions evolve. Remember those earlier theories about giant catfish or underground spirits? Over time, these could solidify into more specific beliefs tied to the drumming. Maybe certain temples or shrines located above particularly resonant spots became known as places where you could feel the earth's rhythm most strongly, perhaps even places associated with healing or receiving messages from the unseen world. Offerings might be made to appease the forces causing the drumming, not out of fear anymore, but as a matter of traditional custom, like leaving out treats for mischievous tanuki. This enduring mystery, this shared unspoken or often spoken, but never explained presence, also contributed to the unique identity of Edo as a city. Cities develop personalities, don't they? London has its fog and double-decker buses. New York has its relentless energy. Kyoto has its ancient serenity. Edo, alongside its bustling markets, its elaborate social structure, its theaters and bathhouses, also had the drumming. It was part of the package. When people from other parts of Japan visited Edo, they'd notice the crowds, the different dialects, the latest fashions, and the drumming. Ah, this must be Edo. They'd think, I can feel the ground drumming, just like they said. A mainstream historical fact that is highly relevant here is the flourishing of popular culture in Edo during the Tokugawa period. With a large urban population, relative peace, and a growing merchant class with disposable income, arts like ukiyo-e, woodblock prints, kabuki theater, and popular literature blossomed. This environment was ripe for absorbing and reflecting contemporary life and phenomena, including persistent oddities like the drumming. The city was a hotbed of creativity and information exchange, and a widespread mysterious event like the drumming would absolutely become fodder for these emerging cultural forms. It wasn't just something that happened Tonanao to Edo, it was something that happened in Edo and was interpreted, stylized, and shared through its vibrant popular culture. Consider how specific trades might interact with the drumming. Perhaps seismologists or their Edo-era equivalent. Those guys who studied earthquakes and earth spirits might have charts tracking the drumming's intensity or minor variations over the years. They might develop complicated, elaborate systems of classification for different drumming patterns, even if they still couldn't explain the source. You can imagine them poring over scrolls, pointing excitedly at graphs. Ah yes, the summer thrum, distinctly different from the winter resonance. Ashurshon probably sounded exactly the same to everyone else. Maybe even the building trades were subtly affected. Did builders learn to recognize certain ground vibrations and adjust their foundation techniques accordingly, perhaps unconsciously? Were there specific areas of the city where the drumming felt more intense? And did that influence property values or the types of structures built there? It's hard to say definitively, but it's plausible that a constant subterranean rhythm would have some practical implications, even if only incorporated into traditional knowledge passed down through apprenticeships. Always put an extra layer of bamboo mesh here, master. The ground feels a bit too drummy. A quirky or fringe tidbit could be the development of specific street performances or vendors who somehow incorporated the drumming. Imagine a blind street musician who claimed he could hear messages in the drumming, offering cryptic prophecies for a few coins. Or a vendor selling ground resonance tonic, a completely useless concoction, guaranteed to either amplify or dampen the feeling of the drumming, depending on what the customer wanted. Perhaps children's games would involve listening to the ground or trying to mimic the rhythm. You can almost picture kids pressing their ears to the earth, giggling and saying, "I hear the big fish." Historians still argue whether the drumming had a significant long-term psychological effect on the populace beyond the initial panic. Did it breed a subtle undercurrent of anxiety or unease? Or did humans' incredible capacity for adaptation mean it simply became another background noise, no more stressful than the wind or the rain after the initial shock wore off? It's difficult to measure the collective psyche of a population hundreds of years ago, relying on written records that may not capture the mundane, persistent aspects of daily life or the subtle shifts in mood. Did the drumming contribute to the famous Edo Stoicism, the ability to endure hardship with a certain wry resignation? It's an intriguing possibility. The drumming was a constant reminder that even in a highly structured society like Tokugawa, Japan, the world held irreducible mysteries. It was a phenomenon that resisted categorization, defying both scientific inquiry and easy spiritual explanation over the long run. It wasn't a monster to be fought or a spirit to be appeased and sent away. It was just there, a persistent, rhythmic question mark beneath the city. This enduring mystery became, in a strange way, a source of shared identity and local pride. It was their weird thing, like a city famous for its perpetually cloudy sky or a specific, unidentifiable smell that everyone just learns to live with. Visitors might find it odd, even unsettling, but for the residents of Edo, it was just part of the package. You lived in Edo, you dealt with the crowds, the strict rules, the amazing food, the vibrant culture, and the drumming. And as the decades rolled into centuries, the drumming continued its steady beat. It outlasted shoguns, famines, fires, and even significant political shifts. It became a historical curiosity for later generations, a story told about the strange old days of Edo. Can you believe someone in the Meiji era might say that the ground used to just drum all the time under the city? You, having lived through a significant portion of this period, carry the weight of that experience. You remember the initial fear, the frantic theories, the gradual acceptance, and finally the integration of that sound into your life. You saw it transform from an alarming event into a cultural touchstone. It's a testament to how communities adapt to the inexplicable, how they build stories and meaning around the things they cannot control or understand. The drumming wasn't just a sound, it was a narrative thread running through the history of Edo, a beat that underscored the city's unique rhythm. And for you, it was the subtle, persistent soundtrack of your life, which is kind of cool in a very boring, historical, sleep-inducing sort of way. So the drumming, that constant rhythmic pulse beneath the paving stones and tatami mats of Edo, became a part of the city's DNA. It was woven into the culture, referenced in art and literature, and just generally accepted as a fact of life, albeit a profoundly weird one. But as the Tokugawa period drew to a close and Japan opened up to the wider world, bringing in new ideas, new technologies, and a whole new way of looking at things, people didn't just forget about the drumming. They started applying these new perspectives to the old mystery. Remember how for centuries the explanations pretty much stuck to the realm of giant underground fish, mischievous spirits, or perhaps just the earth is weird? Well, now you're living through a time of immense change. The old shogunate is giving way to imperial rule, the city is being renamed Tokyo, and suddenly concepts like geology, seismology in a Western sense, rather than the traditional Japanese earthquake lore and structural engineering, are becoming buzzwords. It's like someone swapped out your old scroll library for a whole new internet. Everything you thought you knew is up for grabs. Naturally, minds steeped in these new Western sciences looked at the drumming and thought, right, what actually causes that? They weren't necessarily dismissing the old folklore entirely. History is sticky, and beliefs die hard, especially weirdly charming ones about giant catfish. But they wanted a more mechanistic explanation. An explanation involving rocks and pressure and maybe some fancy newfangled machinery. Imagine university professors, perhaps newly returned from studying abroad, gathering in stuffy rooms filled with maps and instruments that look utterly alien compared to the old Edo tools. They're discussing the drumming, but now using terms like subsurface vibration, resonance frequency, and tectonic stress. They might set up rudimentary seismographs looking for patterns, trying to correlate the drumming with minor tremors or other geological activity. This is where a mainstream historical fact comes in. The Meiji Restoration, beginning in 1868, led to a rapid and deliberate adoption of Western technology, science, and institutions in Japan. The government actively encouraged scholars and engineers to learn from the West to strengthen and modernize the nation. This era saw the founding of modern universities, the establishment of scientific research institutions, and the widespread translation of European scientific texts. It's within this context of intense modernization and scientific curiosity that the drumming, a lingering puzzle from the old era, would inevitably attract new scrutiny. Suddenly, there were people with new tools and a new mindset trying to crack the code that had stumped Edo for centuries. But even with these new tools, the drumming remained stubbornly inexplicable. They might map out areas where it was stronger or weaker, perhaps correlating it with certain geological strata or subsurface water flows. They might theorize about underground rivers, forgotten tunnels collapsing, though the consistency of the rhythm made this less likely, or even some kind of geothermal activity. Yet nothing quite fit. The rhythm was too regular for most natural processes, too widespread for a localized collapse, and lacked the heat or chemical signatures of geothermal vents. It was still just drumming. You living through this transition might find it all a bit disorienting. You're used to people shrugging and saying, "Ah, the earth spirits are restless," or "probably just the great catfish turning over." Now you hear students excitedly talking about P waves and S waves and differential settlement. It's like your local ghost story suddenly got translated into really complex math. And frankly, neither explanation stops the floor from subtly thrumming under your feet. It's still just noise you try to ignore while you're having dinner. Attempts were made to drill down and investigate armed with newfangled drilling equipment imported from abroad. Imagine the scene engineers in Western-style clothes directing laborers using noisy steam-powered drills, attempting to penetrate the earth where the drumming seemed strongest. It must have been quite a spectacle for the locals, a blend of ancient mystery and modern machinery. Did they find anything? Generally no, or nothing conclusive. Just more earth rock and the persistent, maddening beat echoing up the drill shaft. It was like the earth itself was just tapping its foot, utterly unconcerned with your puny attempts to understand its rhythm. "Oh, you're drilling. That's nice." Thump, thump, thump. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this period or slightly later as ideas percolate could be the emergence of pseudoscientific explanations blending old folklore with new terminology. Perhaps someone theorized that the great catfish had a geological structure within its body that caused the vibrations, a kind of internal engine made of tectonic plates. Or maybe that the underground spirits were communicating via rhythmic sonic pulses, using the earth as a giant drum, a sort of ancient subterranean Morse code that modern science just hadn't figured out how to decipher yet. You could even imagine charlatans selling anti-vibration amulets, or harmonic balancers, based on completely made-up scientific principles, probably advertised with diagrams that look impressive but mean absolutely nothing. This crystal matrix aligns your personal frequency with the Earth's subtle resonance, reducing unwanted thrum-thrum. Actual effect zero, but it looks pretty. Historians still argue whether the introduction of Western scientific thought significantly changed the perception of the drumming among the general populace, or if the old folkloric explanations persisted primarily with science being a distant academic pursuit that didn't really offer a more satisfying answer anyway. For the average person, the sound was still the sound, regardless of whether a scholar called it a spirit's drum or a seismic anomaly. It was hard to fear or revere a subsurface vibration in the same way you could a giant, city-shaking fish. The drumming continued throughout the Meiji era, a sonic link back to the old Edo days. As the city grew modernized and changed its name to Tokyo, the drumming was a constant reminder of its deep, mysterious roots. It was still there during the rapid industrialization, the construction of train lines, the building of brick and stone buildings, replacing the old wooden ones. Even as electric lights replaced lanterns and gas lamps lined the streets, the old, steady rhythm from below remained. It was like the earth refused to get with the program, stubbornly clinging to its ancient beat amidst all the modern hustle and bustle. You'd still feel it perhaps less acutely in the areas with deeper modern foundations, but certainly in the older parts of the city or when sitting quietly indoors. It was less a source of active investigation now perhaps, and more a historical curiosity and ongoing anomaly. Oh, the Tokyo drumming? Yes, that's been going on for centuries. Nobody knows why. It had transitioned from a crisis to a puzzle to just a feature of the urban landscape, like the perpetually crowded trains or the summer humidity. Just part of living in Tokyo. There might have been occasional spikes in public interest. Maybe a particularly strong period of drumming would coincide with a minor earthquake, leading to renewed speculation about the connection. Or perhaps a sensational newspaper article would dredge up the old theories complete with lurid illustrations of underground monsters and diagrams of improbable geological formations. But the sustained panicked investigations of the Edo period were largely a thing of the past. The drumming was old news literally. Think about how much your own life has changed during this transition. You've seen samurai give way to bureaucrats' traditional clothing mix with Western suits, and the city skyline begin to shift. And through it all, the drumming has been there. It's the most stable thing in your ever-changing world, which is kind of ironic given it was once a source of such instability and fear. It's gone from being a threat to a constant companion, a bizarrely comforting rhythm in the background of a world spinning faster than you ever imagined. Did anyone ever propose a truly outlandish, non-scientific explanation in this new era? Perhaps someone suggested it was related to the new global telegraph network, some kind of interference pattern or signal being sent through the Earth's crust, or maybe reaching further into the fringe that it was related to activities happening in other parts of the world, a sympathetic vibration or echo. These ideas might have been scoffed at by the new scientific elite, but they might have circulated in popular pamphlets or whispered conversations among those still uncomfortable with purely materialistic explanations. It's human nature to grasp for any explanation, no matter how improbable, when faced with a persistent mystery, especially one that literally vibrates your furniture. Ultimately, despite the new scientific tools and perspectives brought in during the Meiji era, and beyond the mystery of the drumming beneath, Tokyo remained largely unsolved. Theories were proposed, investigations were conducted, but no definitive, universally accepted explanation emerged. It faded slightly from the forefront of public consciousness as the city faced new challenges. Wars, earthquakes, real ones this time, rapid growth, political upheaval. But it was still there, a subtle reminder that some secrets are held deep within the earth, resistant to both ancient folklore and modern science. And you were one of the few left who remembered the sheer panic it caused all those years ago, before it settled into being just another part of the city's strange, enduring song. You're still there in the heart of this rapidly evolving city now called Tokyo. The drumming has become, as we discussed, less of an existential dread and more of a historical footnote. You occasionally notice, like that weird building downtown everyone just accepts is shaped like a giant pineapple. Okay, maybe not. Darn that weird. But you get the idea. The frantic investigations of the Edo period, the hopeful scientific inquiries of the early Meiji years, they faded into memory. Life moves on. There are trains to catch, wars happening far away, and eventually not so far away, and the relentless march of progress. But the drumming is still there. Or is it? This is where things get a bit murky, and frankly a bit sad if you were weirdly attached to the city's rhythmic heartbeat. As the 20th century rolls on, reports of the distinctive, widespread drumming seem to quiet down. Not necessarily stop entirely, but they become less frequent, less intense, and less a topic of common conversation or concern. Think about the sheer scale of change happening in Tokyo. You're witnessing waves of construction unlike anything Edo ever saw. Old wooden structures are replaced by steel and concrete. Foundations go deeper. Subways are dug a whole new kind of underground activity, wouldn't you agree? The city is quite literally building over its old self, layering concrete and asphalt on top of the earth that held that ancient rhythm. Could that be part of it? The conventional wisdom, if there ever was such a thing, regarding the drumming might suggest that all this heavy construction, all the new weight on the earth, the deeper foundations, the underground tunnels perhaps simply muffled the sound. Or maybe the vibrations themselves were somehow altered or disrupted by these massive engineering projects. It's like trying to hear a gentle tapping on the floor from the basement while someone is jackhammering on the ground floor directly above you. The tapping might still be happening, but you're just not going to hear it over the din. This era, the early to mid-20th century in Japan, is marked by incredible societal and physical transformation. A mainstream historical fact here is Tokyo's explosive growth and modernization leading up to World War II, followed by the devastating impact of the war and the subsequent period of intense reconstruction. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 also reshaped the city, dramatically destroying vast areas and leading to rebuilding efforts that incorporated more modern earthquake-resistant designs and deeper foundations. You lived through that too, remember? The ground shaking for a very different, much more terrifying reason than a rhythmic thrum. In the aftermath, walking through streets reduced to rubble, seeing the familiar landscape utterly annihilated. In comparison, a quiet drumming must have seemed like a distant, almost trivial memory. After the earthquake, and even more so after the firebombing raids of Uebawi, much of the old low-lying Edo was gone, replaced by new construction. Could it be that the parts of the city most susceptible to the drumming, the areas with the shallowest foundations built directly on certain geological layers, were the very parts that were most thoroughly rebuilt? It's a plausible idea, certainly more grounded in physical reality than arguing about the migratory patterns of giant subterranean catfish. You might notice it yourself. Perhaps you moved to a newer part of the city after your old neighborhood was destroyed. Your new house sits on a deeper concrete foundation. You don't feel the subtle vibration through the floorboards anymore. Or maybe you visit an older relative who still lives in a pre-war house in a less affected area, and you sit down for tea and there it is, that faint, familiar pulse under your feet. It's quieter now, maybe less insistent, but definitely still there. It's like a ghost of a sound, a whisper from the past. The city's focus shifts dramatically during this time. Before the war, it was about catching up to the West building an empire. During the war, it was about survival, production, and ultimately enduring unimaginable hardship. After the war, it was about rebuilding, economic recovery, and forging a new identity. The drumming, this strange centuries-old anomaly, just didn't figure high on anyone's priority list anymore. People had bigger, more immediate concerns than a weird noise from underground. Bomb shelters were more relevant than burrowing drills looking for sonic sources. Rationing was more important than investigating geological rhythms. It's hard to get worked up about a phantom drum beat when actual bombs are dropping. Historians still argue whether the perceived decline in the drumming was due to physical changes in the city's structure, a shift in public attention and reporting biases, or perhaps a genuine change in the geological or whatever logical source of the sound itself. Did the source stop? Did the transmission change? Or did people just stop listening and talking about it? It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, isn't it? If nobody reports it, does it mean it's gone? Or just that everyone's busy? There's a quirky or fringe tidbit that sometimes pops up during this period. With the rise of mass media, newspapers, radio, you might find occasional articles reminiscing about the old Edo drumming, treating it as a quaint historical curiosity rather than a current event. Maybe a journalist writes a piece interviewing elderly residents who remember the drumming vividly from their youth, comparing it to the near silence of the modern city, or at least the perceived silence beneath the surface noise of cars and industry. These articles might speculate wildly, perhaps suggesting the drumming was a form of communication from a forgotten civilization buried deep beneath the city, or maybe linked to secret military experiments happening underground. Given the times, that last one probably got a few people worried. You might even hear stories of psychics or spiritualists claiming the drumming was the sound of the Earth's soul, weeping for the changes happening on its surface, or the ghosts of the past trying to send a message through the ground. It's human nature to find a supernatural explanation when a scientific one remains elusive even in an age of technology. Oh, you don't hear the Earth drumming anymore. That's because its spirit has been broken by modernity. Or maybe it's just, deeper foundations. Did anyone try to use the new technology of the time to detect it? Perhaps early seismologists now, with more refined instruments than their Meiji predecessors, looked for patterns. They might have detected subtle micro-tremors, but distinguishing a widespread rhythmic pulse from the background noise of a major city or actual seismic activity would have been incredibly difficult. Imagine trying to pick out a specific drum beat in the middle of a rock concert using only a microphone on the floor. It's a tough gig. You as a resident living through this might find yourself occasionally pausing, especially in quieter moments or in older buildings. You might press your ear to the floor trying to discern that familiar rhythm. Is it there? Or is it just your memory playing tricks? The constant background hum of modern life, traffic machinery, distant radios, provides plenty of alternative sounds your brain could interpret as a faint thrumming. It's hard to be sure. It's like trying to remember the exact taste of something you haven't eaten in decades. You have the memory, but is the actual sensation still accessible? Some might even argue that the idea of the drumming became more prominent than the actual sound during this period. It transitioned from a physical phenomenon you felt and heard into a cultural memory, a piece of Tokyo's unique, slightly spooky folklore. It became a story you told newcomers or something you read about in history books focusing on the Edo period. Oh yes, the famous Edo drumming. Fascinating mystery, wasn't it? Don't really hear it anymore, though. It's possible the source itself changed. Geological shifts, changes in underground water levels, maybe even some esoteric activity deep within the Earth's crust could have altered the frequency or intensity of the vibrations. We simply don't know. The lack of consistent, widespread reporting in the 20th century makes it difficult to determine if the drumming truly stopped, significantly weakened, or just fell off the public radar. Think about your own experience. Did you actively stop noticing it, perhaps subconsciously? Or did it genuinely become so faint that it no longer intruded on your consciousness? Maybe a bit of both. The city got louder, your life got busier, and the subtle beat from below became lost in the noise, both literal and metaphorical. It was no longer the dominant, undeniable sensation it had been for your ancestors. The drumming, once a shared, palpable experience for generations of Edo Tokyo residents, seemed to be fading into legend, another casualty of progress and time. It was a transition from a present-day mystery to a historical one, discussed in classrooms and old books, rather than felt underfoot in the marketplace or at home. And you, having lived through the Edo period, where it was a constant, sometimes terrifying presence, are one of the last who truly remember what it was like when the earth beneath the city seemed to have a pulse. A secrets-kept rhythm, beating just for you. You're deep in the modern labyrinth now, the Tokyo of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Gone are the gas lamps and wooden carts, replaced by neon glow electric trains and the relentless hum of electronics. The city has become a vertical monster, skyscrapers piercing the clouds, supported by foundations that plunge scores of meters into the earth. Underground, it's a whole new world, a complex web of subway lines, utility tunnels, parking garages, and vast hidden infrastructure that makes the drainage systems of Edo seem like a garden hose compared to a fire hydrant. And the drumming? Well, it's quiet, painfully noticeably quiet for someone who remembers what it used to be. That pervasive, subtle thrum, the earth's pulse beneath your feet, is almost entirely absent from your daily experience. It's like trying to hear a distant cricket chirp during a fireworks display. The background noise of hyper-modern life simply drowns out any possibility of discerning that ancient rhythm. The conversation about the drumming has shifted entirely. It's no longer something people feel or discuss as a current event. It's firmly relegated to history books, local folklore, or maybe a fleeting mention on a niche history documentary. Younger generations born and raised in this concrete and steel jungle have likely never felt it. You might try to explain it to them, describe that deep, resonant vibration, and they'd look at you with a polite, slightly confused smile, perhaps wondering if you're mixing up urban legends with actual history, or maybe just getting old and imagining things. The ground drummed like an earthquake, but rhythmic weird. Yeah, kid, it was weird, but it was real. To you, anyway. The city structure itself has changed so drastically. Remember how we talked about foundations? Now, foundations aren't just a few feet deep. They're engineering marvels designed to withstand massive earthquakes, often drilled and piled incredibly far down. The sheer weight of the modern city, the depth of its construction, the endless digging for new tunnels and underground spaces. It's as if Tokyo has encased itself in a thick, non-resonant shell, or perhaps even actively disrupted whatever geological pathways the drumming vibrations used to travel through. Imagine wrapping a drum in so many layers of padding that you can barely hear it when you hit it. That feels a bit like what's happened here. A mainstream historical fact marking this period is Japan's post-war economic miracle, and its rise as a global technological and economic powerhouse with Tokyo as its pulsating heart. This era saw unprecedented construction booms, driven by rapid industrialization, urbanization, in preparation for international events like the Olympics. The city was constantly under reconstruction, layering modernity upon its historical footprint. This non-stop heavy-duty building and the deeper penetration into the earth for utilities and subways would undoubtedly introduce vast amounts of noise and physical disruption into the ground. Scholars still debate whether the apparent disappearance of the drumming is because the source itself stopped or changed, or if the city changed so much that sensing it became impossible. Did the drum stop beating, or did we just go deaf to it under tons of concrete and asphalt? It's a fundamental question without a clear answer, mostly because there's no consistent, measurable phenomenon to study anymore. It's hard to analyze a sound nobody can consistently hear. The sheer lack of modern credible reports is striking. You don't see articles in the newspaper, assuming anyone reads physical newspapers anymore, or segments on the evening news talking about a mysterious drumming. You don't hear people whispering about it in cafes or on trains. It simply isn't a part of the contemporary urban experience. The problems of modern Tokyo are traffic jams, housing costs, work, stress, finding a good cup of artisanal coffee, not a rhythmic pulse from the underworld. Is it possible it's still there, but so incredibly faint that only the most sensitive instruments could pick it up? Maybe. But without widespread consistent reports, no major scientific body is going to dedicate significant resources to tracking down a phantom rhythm that might just be the distant rumble of a subway or the vibration from a particularly heavy truck going by. There are real earthquakes to predict and mitigate after all. Those are much higher up the priority list than a historical anomaly that may or may not still exist. You might perhaps encounter a quirky or fringe tidbit online. Scroll through forums dedicated to Tokyo history, urban exploration, or even paranormal activity, and you might find scattered posts referencing the Edo drumming. People sharing old legends speculating wildly. Some might link it to supposed ley lines under the city, others to secret underground military research. A callback to earlier fears, now updated with modern tech or even cryptids like gigantic burrowing worms or moles. You might find grainy videos claiming to capture the Tokyo hum or subtle ground vibrations, often quickly debunked or attributed to known sources. It's become fodder for internet forums and late-night speculation, far removed from the very real concern it caused centuries ago. It's like discussing Bigfoot sightings. Entertaining, but not exactly something you base public policy on. Think about trying to feel that subtle vibration now. You're sitting in a high-rise apartment. Below you, dozens of floors of concrete and steel. Below that potentially deep underground infrastructure. The city is a constant thrum of mechanical noise. Air conditioning units, elevators, distant traffic, the rumble of trains far below. Where would you even begin to feel that ancient natural pulse? It's buried under layers of human activity. Even if you stood in one of the few remaining genuinely old structures, say a temple or a traditional house that somehow survived or was rebuilt using older methods in a quieter corner, the ambient noise of the city would still be immense compared to Edo times. And the ground beneath it has still been impacted by centuries of development around it. The water table has changed, new stresses have been placed on the earth. Could the source itself have ceased? Geological processes are slow but not static. Perhaps the specific conditions that created the drumming, whatever they were, changed over time. Maybe the underground caverns filled with water or collapsed, or new faults formed, or old ones sealed up. Without knowing the cause, it's impossible to rule out that it simply stopped, like a very slow, very deep, very mysterious clock finally winding down. There's a sense of finality to it, isn't there? The Edo drumming, once a defining, albeit perplexing characteristic of the city, has seemingly faded out of existence, or at least out of detectability. It's another layer of the past buried under the relentless march of the present. You are in a way one of the last living archives of that particular sensation. Your memory holds the echo of a sound that the modern city has largely forgotten. It's like an old song that nobody sings anymore. The sheet music might exist in an archive, people might read about it, but the actual performance, the felt experience of the music is gone. The earth beneath Tokyo might still hold its secrets, but the rhythmic tapping that once announced them seems to have been silenced, replaced by the louder, harsher, less mysterious sounds of the 21st century. You live in a city that is paradoxically more connected and understood than ever before, thanks to technology and science, yet one whose ancient, subtle mysteries seem to have retreated even further into the shadows, buried beneath concrete data streams and the sheer volume of modern life. The drumming is no longer a present-day enigma. It is now almost entirely a historical ghost, a whisper from the past that only those who remember can still almost hear if they listen very, very carefully, perhaps late at night in a very quiet room, and maybe only in their minds. So the mystery of the drumming beneath Eto is swirling, spreading through the city like gossip about a samurai's scandalous haircut. People are talking, speculating, feeling that uneasy vibration under their feet. But what about the powers that be? What does the mighty shogunate, the military government ruling Japan with an iron fist from its massive castle in the heart of Edo, have to say about a strange, rhythmic noise coming from the ground? Well, initially, probably not much. You have to understand the nature of the Edo shogunate. Their primary concerns were stability control and maintaining the strict social hierarchy. Keeping the peace, collecting rice taxes, enforcing sumptuary laws, telling people what clothes they could wear, what food they could eat, how fancy their houses could be. Imagine the bureaucracy of inspecting everyone's curtains. Unexplained underground noises didn't exactly fit neatly into these categories. They weren't a peasant uprising, a potential foreign invasion, not yet anyway, or a threat to the shogun himself. To the high officials, it was likely dismissed as mere superstition, the ramblings of ignorant commoners, or perhaps a minor local disturbance that the ward officials could handle. You can almost hear the exasperated sigh of a magistrate faced with a report about subterranean drumming when he's got a stack of paperwork about regulating the width of noodle stalls to get through. Drumming, you say, from underground. Is it interfering with the grain shipments? No right file it under baffling nuisances, somewhere after excessive kite flying and before farmers complaining about badgers? But as the reports persisted, as more people spoke of the sound, not just the easily excitable, but perhaps even some lower-ranking samurai or respected merchants, it might have become harder to ignore completely. Maybe a local magistrate, a machi bugyo, city commissioner, or one of his subordinates felt compelled to make a show of looking into it. The machi bugyo were responsible for the day-to-day administration and policing of Edo, managing everything from law enforcement and firefighting to resolving disputes and dealing with peculiar occurrences. If enough complaints landed on their desks, or if the rumors started causing significant unease or disruption in a particular district, they would have had to do something. So picture the scene. Some poor, probably overworked low-level official is tasked with investigating the underground drums. Where do you even begin? There were no seismographs, no ground-penetrating radar, no acoustic sensors you could just stick into the ground. Their tools were limited to their ears, their eyes shovels, and the ability to ask questions. They might have gone to the areas where the sound was most reported, standing around at night trying to listen intently. You can imagine them maybe accompanied by a couple of police constables, Yuriki or Doshin, huddled in the darkness, straining their ears over the ambient sounds of the sleeping city. The distant watchman's clappers, a dog barking the rustle of leaves. Do you hear it, Tanaka-san? No commissioner, just my stomach rumbling. Had pickled radishes for dinner. Silence. Wait, was that it, or just the wind? Their investigation methods were likely rudimentary, to say the least. They might have tried tapping on the ground, perhaps even digging a few small test pits in specific locations, where the sound seemed loudest. But digging in a densely populated urban area like Edo was a logistical nightmare. You couldn't just excavate freely. You'd run into foundations, water pipes, simple wooden conduits back then, but still their drainage systems, or disturb someone's garden. And even if you dug a few feet down, what would you expect to find? A giant drum, a subterranean band practice. The digging itself would likely create more noise and confusion than it resolved. The core problem was the nature of the phenomenon itself. It was sporadic and elusive. The officials would arrive, listen, hear nothing, declare it a false alarm, and then the sound would start again the next night, just in a different location. It was like trying to catch a phantom. Imagine trying to investigate a mysterious Wi-Fi signal that only appears for 5 minutes a night, moves around your house, and disappears if you get too close with your detection equipment. Frustrating right now, strip away all your technology, and give yourself only a compass and a notepad. That's the Edo investigators' predicament. Another significant obstacle was the general attitude towards such matters. In the strictly rational Confucian-influenced mindset that the shogunate tried to promote, anything smacking of the supernatural or inexplicable was often dismissed as folly. Officialdom preferred tangible problems with tangible solutions. Ghost spirits, curses, these were things for priests and exorcists, not government officials. So even if an investigator did hear something strange, they might be reluctant to report it honestly for fear of being ridiculed or seen as incompetent. It was easier to write it off as wind, distant thunder, or the creaking of old buildings. This reluctance to engage with the intangible meant that any official investigations were likely half-hearted and under-resourced. They weren't going to divert significant manpower or funds to chase after a sound. Their priority was maintaining order and collecting taxes. A peculiar sound, no matter how unsettling to the populace, wasn't going to make the shogun lose sleep unless it threatened the fundamental structure of his rule. One historical fact here is that the shogunate did maintain detailed records on things they cared about, like cadastral surveys for land tax criminal activity and major infrastructure projects. The absence of significant records about the drumming itself from official sources suggests it never rose to that level of governmental concern. The failure of these likely meager official efforts had a significant impact on the public perception of the drumming. When the government, the ultimate authority in their lives, couldn't or wouldn't provide an explanation, it legitimized the mystery. It told the people that this wasn't something simple, something easily explained away by official pronouncements. Their inability to find a cause didn't dispel the fears, it amplified them. If even the powerful shogunate police couldn't figure it out, what hope was there? This official silence or dismissal meant that the field of explanation was left wide open for popular theories. If it wasn't a natural phenomenon the authorities could identify, and it wasn't something mundane like construction they'd simply failed to mention, then it must be something else. And in Edo, something else often meant something extraordinary, something outside the realm of normal human experience. The lack of an official answer fueled the fires of rumor and speculation, pushing the narrative further into the realm of the supernatural or the deeply unsettling. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the difficulty and perhaps the mindset of such investigations might be imagining officials trying to correlate the sound with specific locations. They might have questioned residents. Did you hear the drum last night? Where exactly were you standing? Was it near the well or closer to the temple gate? People's memories are unreliable, especially when describing fleeting sounds heard in the dark. One person might say it came from the north, another from the west. Someone might swear it was loudest near a specific old stone lantern, leading to fruitless investigations around that spot. The subjective nature of the reports made objective investigation incredibly difficult. You couldn't arrest the sound, you couldn't tax it, you couldn't ban it by official decree. It was untouchable by the shogunate's usual tools of governance. Imagine the frustration. You're an official, you've spent a cold night listening to nothing but crickets and distant city noises. You've talked to a dozen confused people, and you have absolutely zero concrete evidence to report back to your superior. You write your report probably full of vague language and concluding that the reports are likely exaggerated or due to natural causes, not requiring further investigation. It gets filed away dusty and forgotten in some administrative archive, but the drumming continues, occasionally unpredictably mocking the neat order of the shogunate's paperwork. This period of failed or absent official investigation is crucial to the story. It cemented the drumming as a genuine mystery, something beyond the easy reach of authority and rational explanation. It transformed it from a mere annoyance into an enigma that burrowed deep into the city's consciousness. It became a persistent piece of folklore passed down through generations precisely because the government never managed to stamp it out with a definitive explanation or a really impressive show of digging. Historians still debate how seriously the shogunate ever truly took these reports. Some argue they were completely dismissed. Others suggest there were genuine, albeit ineffective attempts to understand them, perhaps fearing the potential for mass panic if the rumors grew unchecked. The truth is likely somewhere in between, varying depending on the specific time period the district involved and the personality of the local officials. The shogunate was in many ways a victim of its own success in creating a stable closed society. They prioritized control and order over scientific inquiry or addressing popular anxieties that didn't fit their mold. This approach worked well for many things, maintaining peace for over 200 years, but it left them ill-equipped to handle a phenomenon like the underground drumming, which defied their established methods of control and understanding. So while you continue to live in Edo, hearing those occasional unsettling rhythms from below, you also witness the limits of the powerful government's reach. They can control people, they can control trade, they can even try to control thoughts and fashion, but they cannot control the strange sounds that emanate from the earth beneath their feet. And that realization that there are forces or phenomena that even the mighty shogun cannot explain or command adds another layer of unease to the drumming itself. It makes the mystery feel not just strange, but perhaps even a little bit dangerous, a sign that the meticulously ordered world of Edo might not be as solid or predictable as it seems. You learn not to rely on official pronouncements for an answer, because clearly they don't have one. The search for understanding, if it is to continue, will have to look elsewhere, perhaps to the fringes of society, to those who deal in the unconventional or the unknown, or perhaps even to the ordinary people who simply refuse to stop listening and wondering. So you've seen the limits of official power, haven't you? The mighty shogunate, for all its regulations and samurai muscle, couldn't silence the drumming. Their magistrates poked and prodded. They listened and they questioned, and they ultimately came up empty-handed, or at least they failed to produce any explanation that satisfied the populace. This failure, this gaping void where an official answer should have been, was like a fertile ground for seeds of a different kind to sprout. Seeds of folklore, of superstition, of explanations that reach far beyond the mundane world of broken pipes or hidden construction work. When the rational fails, the irrational often steps in to fill the gap. And in Edo, a city steeped in ancient traditions layered with centuries of belief systems, from the serene principles of Buddhism and Shinto to the vibrant, sometimes terrifying world of yokai, supernatural creatures and kami spirits, there was no shortage of material for the collective imagination to draw upon. If the drumming wasn't something the authorities could explain with shovels and questioning, then perhaps it wasn't something of this world at all. The theories that began circulating among the people whispered in tea houses, shared over communal bathhouse dips, or muttered nervously in the darkened alleys were far more colorful and frankly a lot more interesting than anything a government official might conjure up. These weren't theories based on geological surveys, an unknown concept anyway, or acoustic analysis. They were based on instinct, on fear, on stories passed down through generations. One pervasive type of theory connected the drumming to the earth itself, but not in a purely scientific, tectonic way. Instead, people imagined beings within the earth. Was it the heartbeat of a colossal creature sleeping deep beneath the city Edo was built on, relatively soft ground, a vast delta gradually reclaimed from Tokyo Bay? Perhaps this wasn't just earth and mud, but the back of some slumbering subterranean giant, its rhythmic pulse vibrating upwards through the soil. This is a classic folkloric trope across many cultures. The idea of the world resting on or being inhabited by immense beings. Imagine the scale of a creature so vast that its heartbeat could be felt across miles, from the bustling merchant districts of Nihonbashi to the pleasure quarters of Yoshiwara. Thinking about it, if you could hear the heartbeat, maybe the rumbling during an earthquake, was just it shifting in its sleep, stretching a limb or turning over. Bit of a dramatic wake-up call, really. Another popular line of thought revolved around the idea of earth spirits or deities. Kami, connected to the land itself. Shinto teaches that spirits inhabit everything: mountains, rivers, trees, even rocks. Why not the ground beneath your feet? Perhaps these spirits were unhappy, disturbed by the ever-growing, ever-changing city expanding over their ancient domain. The drumming could be their protest, a warning, or even a ritual being performed in their hidden realm. Maybe they were trying to communicate something vital, something the noisy, hurried humans above were failing to understand. The rhythm might have been a language, a percussive plea or threat echoing from the spiritual foundations of Edo. You could almost picture Little Earth, kami perhaps resembling mischievous goblins, or more solemn ancient beings gathering underground, tapping out their message on roots or stones, their underground meeting just happening to resonate up to the surface. Then there were the yokai. Edo was a city where belief in yokai was commonplace, woven into the fabric of daily life and storytelling. These weren't just scary monsters. They were often embodiments of natural phenomena, human fears, or simply the unexplainable quirks of the world. Could the drumming be the work of a specific yokai? Perhaps one unknown, or one whose usual haunts were far from the city now drawn here by something. Some tales spoke of subterranean yokai creatures that lived in caves or underground tunnels. Maybe the drumming was their mating call, or the sound of them moving heavy objects, or even just their version of having a rave deep underground. Imagine stumbling upon a yokai dance party way down there. Probably wouldn't have a great Yelp review service, is likely spotty, and the beats are terrifyingly unpredictable. A particularly unsettling theory linked the sound to the realm of the dead, or perhaps the boundaries between the living world and the afterlife. The drumming could be spirits trying to escape, or perhaps the sound of rituals being performed in the underworld, its echoes bleeding into the land of the living. There were tales of rokurokubi, long-necked women, or yurei ghosts tied to specific locations. Could this drumming be a less localized, haunting a citywide manifestation of restless souls or forces from the other side? The idea that the ground you walked on might be thinly separating you from something ancient, rhythmic, and perhaps malevolent was a chilling thought that the drumming brought uncomfortably close to home. It gave a whole new meaning to the phrase, 6 feet under. Some theories were more specific, drawing on existing Edo folklore. While earthquakes were often attributed to the giant catfish, Namazu thrashing beneath the earth, perhaps the drumming was linked to a different mythical creature. Or maybe it was the Namazu, but making a different sound before an earthquake, a warning drum rather than a violent shake. The association of rhythmic sound with impending natural disaster or supernatural activity is a common thread in folklore worldwide. The drums could be a prelude, a sign that something big and disruptive was coming, adding an element of prophecy and dread to the mystery. You'd probably start paying a lot more attention to rhythmic noises if you thought they were announcing a giant fish-induced tremor. These theories weren't just idle speculation, they served a purpose. In a world without scientific explanations for phenomena like seismic activity or geological rumblings, folklore provided a framework for understanding the inexplicable. It gave people a narrative, even if it was a scary one. It transformed a terrifyingly random sound into something potentially meaningful, something that could perhaps be appeased or understood. If it was an earth spirit, maybe prayers or offerings could calm it. If it was a yokai, perhaps a protective charm or a specific ritual could ward it off. This sense of having a potential response, however rooted in superstition, was often more comforting than the blank, uncomprehending stare of officialdom. Historians still argue whether these folkloric explanations were genuinely believed by everyone, or if they were more akin to shared stories and cautionary tales that simply colored people's perception of the phenomenon. Was it deep conviction, or simply the lens through which the uneducated masses processed strangeness in a pre-scientific age? It's likely a mix. Some undoubtedly took the yokai theories quite seriously, while others might have entertained them more as intriguing possibilities or simply enjoyed the thrill of a good ghost story, especially one they could potentially hear for themselves. A quirky tidbit that adds color to this period is the role of storytellers and artists. As the drumming rumors spread, they likely found their way into popular culture. Storytellers might weave tales of the underground drums into their performances, perhaps embellishing the yokai or spirit connections. Woodblock print artists, who often depicted ghosts, monsters, and scenes from folklore, might have created images inspired by the drumming, perhaps showing shadowy figures drumming underground or a giant creature stirring beneath the city. These cultural representations would in turn feed back into the public's perception, shaping and solidifying the folkloric explanations in the popular imagination. Imagine seeing a woodblock print advertising a play about the Edo Earth Drummer. You'd be even more primed to hear it yourself that night. The contrast between the shogunate's attempts at rational inquiry, however limited, and the populace's turn toward the supernatural highlights a fundamental difference in how different levels of society process the mystery. The officials, bound by protocol and a desire for order, sought a tangible cause and failed. The people, less constrained and drawing on a richer well of traditional beliefs, found meaning and explanation in the intangible, the spiritual, and the fantastic. This reliance on folklore also speaks to the power of community knowledge and shared experience. While the officials might have dismissed individual reports, the collective testimony of thousands hearing the same strange phenomenon couldn't be easily ignored within the community itself. The shared fear, the shared wonder, and the shared attempts to explain it through familiar cultural narratives strengthened these folkloric theories, making them feel true or at least plausible to many. You living through this would feel this tension. On one hand, the reassuring presence of the shogunate and its efforts to maintain order. On the other, the unsettling reality that even they couldn't explain the rhythmic pulse beneath your feet. And then the whispers of the old stories, of creatures in the deep of spirits, unbound of a world layered not just with earth and stone, but with hidden realms and potent invisible forces. You might find yourself listening more closely to the old women telling tales, or studying the strange images in a yokai picture book, wondering if the answers lay not in official reports, but in the very stories that your culture told itself about the unknown. These supernatural theories, while perhaps not scientifically accurate, were incredibly resilient. They didn't require proof beyond the subjective experience of hearing the sound. They tapped into deep-seated beliefs and anxieties. And they offered a narrative that was far more compelling and enduring than officials found nothing unusual. They ensured that the drumming remained not just a strange noise, but a mystery with potentially profound, even terrifying implications for the city and its inhabitants. It was a reminder that beneath the meticulously ordered surface of Edo life, the ancient, wild, and unexplained world still existed, occasionally making its presence felt through a persistent rhythmic beat coming from the ground itself. And as the rational explanations faltered, the fantastical ones took firm root, defining the drumming for generations to come. So you've lived with the drumming, felt the ground vibrating beneath you, watched the officials scratch their heads, and listened to the wild tales of earth spirits and subterranean yokai. For weeks, maybe months, this rhythmic pulse was just there, a constant, unnerving presence that became a strange part of the city's background noise, or perhaps the foreground of its anxieties. You got used to it in a way you never wanted to get used to something so fundamentally weird. Like learning to sleep through a leaky faucet, except the faucet was the planet groaning. But here's the thing about most unexplained phenomena, especially those rooted in the environment or geology, they often don't last forever. Just as suddenly, or perhaps as gradually and imperceptibly as it began, the drumming started to fade. There wasn't likely a grand finale, no final climactic boom followed by silence. More likely, the reports began to dwindle. The rhythm might have become less distinct, the intensity lessened, or it simply became less frequent until one day you realized you hadn't heard it in a while. Imagine it, you're walking home from the market laden with supplies, or perhaps sharing a cup of tea with a neighbor, and someone says, "You know, I haven't heard that drumming recently." And you pause, tilt your head, listen intently, and realize they're right. The rhythmic vibration, the subtle thrum beneath your geta, or the floorboards of your home is gone. Just like that. The cessation of the drumming is in its own way as mysterious as its origin. If official records were scarce on the cause, they were even more so on the end. Historical accounts from the period that even mention the drumming often simply note that it occurred for a time and then ceased, offering no explanation for its departure. Did the underground conditions change? Did the geological stress release? Did the yokai finish their rave and go home? Did the earth spirit finally calm down or move on? The lack of a documented end to the phenomenon is ironically a mainstream historical fact about the event, namely that history doesn't tell us how or why it stopped. We simply know it did. For those who lived through it, the silence must have felt both relieving and perhaps a little unsettling. The absence of the sound left a void, a question mark hanging in the air, or rather beneath the ground. The explanations, whether official or folkloric, lost their immediate urgency once the phenomenon they sought to explain was gone. The shogunate officials could finally close their files on the underground drumming incident, probably with a collective shrug and a quiet prayer of thanks. The people no longer disturbed in their homes could return to worrying about more pressing matters like the price of rice or their annoying neighbor. But things like this, things that genuinely rattle a city and defy explanation, they don't just vanish from memory entirely. Even as the drumming faded from daily experience, it persisted in conversations, evolving from an immediate mystery into a story. Remember that time the ground used to drum? People would ask years later, perhaps, to their children or grandchildren, recounting their own experiences or the wildest rumors they'd heard. The fear might have lessened, but the wonder and the confusion remained. The folkloric explanations in particular proved more durable than the mundane theories. While nobody was likely to tell a thrilling tale about slightly offset construction work or a particularly noisy underground stream, stories of earth-dwelling yokai or restless spirits had staying power. They became cautionary tales, spooky anecdotes, or just colorful bits of local lore. The drumming, even after it stopped, became intertwined with Edo's rich tapestry of ghost stories and supernatural legends. You might hear a street performer telling a dramatized version of the event, complete with rumbling sound effects and exaggerated tales of creatures from the deep. Historians still argue whether the phenomenon was a singular event or a recurring type of seismic or acoustic anomaly that happened on multiple occasions in different locations over time, simply reported under the same umbrella description of underground drumming. Some suggest there might have been several distinct instances of geological noise or human activity like secret tunneling, though less likely to be rhythmic and widespread, that got conflated into one prolonged event in the historical record and collective memory. This lack of precise dating and location data in the primary sources makes it hard to pin down if you're talking about one big mystery or a series of smaller unrelated ones grouped together by confusing reports. The legacy of the Edo drumming is a fascinating blend of historical fact and persistent folklore. It's a real event documented in official papers and private diaries, yet its explanation lives primarily in the realm of speculation and legend. It's a quirky tidbit of footnote in the grand history of Edo that few outside of specialists might know, but within the context of the city's mysteries and folklore, it holds a unique place. It's proof that even in a highly controlled society like Tokugawa, Japan, the natural world or the supernatural one, depending on your perspective, could still throw up phenomena that defied all attempts at rational understanding and official control. Think about it from your perspective. You lived through it, you felt it, you heard the whispers and maybe even the pronouncements from the magistrates. When the drumming finally stopped, it didn't provide closure in the way a discovered cause would have. There was no moment of, so that's what it was. Instead, there was just silence, a silent mystery replacing a noisy one. For decades, maybe even centuries, the memory would linger in certain families or neighborhoods particularly affected. Old maps of Edo don't have a special marking for drumming zone, and there are no specific shrines built to appease the potential earth spirits who caused it, not that history records anyway. But the story persisted. It might have mutated slightly over time, details shifting the specific sound, perhaps exaggerated or softened in retellings. Like a game of historical telephone played over generations. The fact that the mystery endured highlights the limits of knowledge and power in that era. For all their authority, the shogunate couldn't command the earth to be silent or yield its secrets. For all their tradition, the people's folklore couldn't definitively prove the existence of their yokai explanations. It remains stubbornly in the realm of the unexplained, a testament to the vast unknown forces that lie beneath the surface of even the most meticulously ordered human societies. Even today, if you were to delve into niche historical accounts or collections of Edo folklore, you might stumble upon mentions of the mysterious drumming. It's not as famous as, say, the story of the 47 Ronin or the Great Mereki Fire, but it's there a quieter, stranger note in the city's past. It's the kind of historical puzzle that keeps specialists up at night, sifting through fragmented records trying to find a pattern, a geological clue, anything that might shed light on that peculiar period when the very ground beneath Edo seemed to beat with a strange internal rhythm. So the drumming faded. The city moved on. Edo grew into Tokyo, a sprawling modern metropolis. The old wooden buildings gave way to concrete and steel, the narrow alleys were replaced by wide boulevards, and the soft delta ground was built up and reinforced. But somewhere deep beneath the subway lines and the skyscrapers, perhaps the memory of that rhythmic pulse still exists, encoded in the very earth that once vibrated with its presence. And you, having walked the streets of that ancient city, having felt that strange thrumming, are now one of the few who remembers what it was like when the ground itself held a secret rhythm, a mystery that defied logic and lingered long after the sound itself fell silent. It's a reminder that history isn't just about grand events and famous people. It's also about the small, strange, unexplained things that happen to ordinary people. The mysteries they lived with and never fully understood, fading into the quiet corners of the past, waiting for someone to listen for their echoes once more. And now, as our journey through the quiet, rhythmic mystery beneath Edo's streets draws to a close, let the sounds of the past fade gently into the background. The strange drumming has ceased, the historical records offer no clear answers, and the ancient city has long since transformed. Let the images of Edo, the wooden houses, the bustling streets, the worried faces listening to the ground, soften and dissipate in your mind. There are no more unsettling vibrations, no more unanswered questions demanding immediate attention, just the quiet hum of the present moment. Allow yourself to settle deeper into your space, feeling the solid, silent ground beneath you, free from ancient rhythmic secrets. Your mind is clear, your body relaxed, and the world outside is calm and still.